Around 500 BC, a distinctive culture known as the Natufian emerged, representing a critical intermediary step between the nomadic hunter-gatherer bands of the Paleolithic and the settled agricultural communities of the Neolithic. The Natufians were not yet farmers, but their approach to subsistence was revolutionary. They became intensive collectors of wild resources, establishing semi-permanent base camps from which they could exploit the rich local environment. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Ain Malahar in the Hula Valley reveals their characteristic dwellings, semi-subterranean circular pit houses, typically 4 to 6 meters in diameter, with foundations built of undressed stone. This investment in substantial architecture indicates a level of sedentism previously unseen. Their toolkit was defined by the microlith, a small, precisely shaped flint bladelet. These were not used individually but were set into bone or wooden hafts to create composite tools, most notably sickles for harvesting the abundant wild cereals like emmer wheat and barley. Gazelle hunting remained a primary source of protein, supplemented by a wide array of other game, fish, and plants. Natufian society possessed a notable artistic and spiritual life. They crafted personal adornments from bone, teeth, and marine shells, suggesting long-distance trade or travel to the coast. Their burial practices were also significant. They interred their dead within their settlements, often in pits beneath house floors, a practice suggesting a strong connection to place and ancestry. Some burials were elaborate, with individuals adorned in intricate headdresses and necklaces, indicating emerging social stratification. Just a quick announcement, if you enjoy this video so far, please subscribe to our channel, as it motivates us to bring you a new story every evening. This is the only kind request tonight, and we won't bother you with it anymore until the very end of today's story. Let's get back to the video. One of the most important Natufian sites was established near a bountiful perennial spring in the Jordan Valley, an oasis that would become the city of Jericho. At this location, known archaeologically as Tel es Sultan, the Natufians constructed what appears to be a small stone sanctuary, a precursor to the monumental structures that would follow. As the Natufian period gave way to the pre-pottery Neolithic A around 600 BC, this settlement at Jericho underwent an extraordinary transformation. The inhabitants constructed a massive stone wall, over 3.5 meters high and nearly 2 meters thick, encircling an area of several acres. Within this wall stood an imposing circular stone tower, almost 9 meters in diameter and reaching a similar height, complete with a preserved internal staircase. The construction of these fortifications required a level of social organization and coordinated labor previously unimaginable, implying a large, stable population with a leadership capable of planning and executing vast public works projects. The purpose of these structures remains a subject of debate. They may have served as a defense against rival groups drawn to the oasis's resources, or perhaps as a monumental barrier against the seasonal flash floods that swept down from the nearby hills. This settlement at Jericho, with its formidable tower and wall, stands as the world's first known town, a testament to the profound social and technological changes that marked the true dawn of permanent human settlement. Following millennia of village life, a profound societal transformation began around 3300 BC, ushering in the early Bronze Age. This period witnessed the region's first true urban revolution, a widespread phenomenon that saw the landscape dotted with large fortified city-states, dwarfing the settlements of previous eras. This was not merely an increase in population size, but a fundamental restructuring of economic, political, and social life. The hallmark of this new urbanism was the construction of monumental defensive systems. Cities like Arad in the Negev, Megiddo in the Jezreel Valley, and Ai near the Central Highlands were enclosed by massive stone walls, some several meters thick and reinforced with projecting towers and sloping earthen ramparts known as glacis. These fortifications represent a massive investment of collective labor, pointing to the existence of a centralized authority capable of mobilizing and directing the populace. This new political structure was centered on public buildings, including palaces and temples, which served as the hubs of administration and religious life. Excavations have revealed standardized architectural forms for these elite structures, suggesting a shared cultural template among the ruling classes of these independent polities. The economic engine driving this urbanization was a shift towards a managed, surplus-producing economy. While grain cultivation continued, the widespread domestication of olive trees and grapevines became critical. The production of olive oil and wine, valuable and easily transportable commodities, fueled extensive trade networks. This commercial activity is most evident in the strong connections with Old Kingdom Egypt. Egyptian pottery, palettes, and royal inscriptions found at sites throughout southern Palestine, and Palestinian pottery discovered in the Nile Delta, attest to a vibrant and sustained period of exchange. Metallurgy also became a key industry, with copper tools and weapons, once rare, becoming increasingly common. The social fabric grew more complex and hierarchical. A clear ruling elite, whose power was demonstrated through control of public works and access to imported luxury goods, stood atop a society of specialized craftsmen, merchants, and a large agricultural workforce that supported the urban centers from surrounding villages. While a local system of writing had not yet developed, administration was likely managed through the use of cylinder seals, a technology borrowed from Mesopotamia to mark and secure goods. This flourishing urban culture persisted for nearly 1,000 years, but its end was abrupt. Around 2300 BC, a wave of destruction and abandonment swept across the region, with the great fortified cities of the early Bronze Age falling into ruin, marking the close of this first great chapter of urban life. After a period of societal collapse and deurbanization that marked the end of the early Bronze Age, a new wave of settlement and cultural dynamism emerged around 2000 BC. The Middle Bronze Age saw the re-establishment of powerful city-states, a process influenced by Amorite peoples migrating from the north and east. This era, known as the Age of the Canaanites, was characterized by renewed prosperity, technological innovation, and a complex geopolitical landscape. The political map consisted of a network of rival urban centers, each controlling a small agricultural hinterland. Major sites like Hazor in the north, along with Shechem, Gezer, and Lachish, grew into formidable regional powers. The defining architectural feature of this period was a new style of military engineering. Cities were protected by immense earthen ramparts, constructed with steeply sloped glacis designed to repel siege engines. These were often topped with thick mud brick walls and featured sophisticated multi-chambered gatehouses, attesting to an age of endemic warfare and advanced defensive strategy. This period was a crucible of military technology. The introduction of the lightweight, spoked-wheel chariot, drawn by horses, revolutionized the battlefield, creating a fast-moving, elite warrior class. This was complemented by new forms of bronze weaponry, including the distinctive duck-bill axe and socketed spearheads, which were superior to earlier designs. The composite bow, a powerful weapon adopted from steppe peoples, also became a key part of the Canaanite military arsenal. Canaanite society was deeply integrated into the wider world of the ancient Near East. It served as a crucial land bridge between the great powers of Middle Kingdom Egypt to the south and the empires of Mesopotamia and Anatolia. This strategic position fueled a vibrant international trade, with Canaanite cities exporting agricultural goods and serving as intermediaries for copper from Cyprus and tin from as far as Anatolia, the essential ingredients for bronze. Culturally, the most significant innovation of the era was the development of the Proto-Canaanite alphabet. This script, a precursor to all modern alphabets, simplified writing by using a small number of signs to represent consonants, a revolutionary departure from the complex cuneiform and hieroglyphic systems of its neighbors. Religious life centered on a pantheon dominated by the high god El and the increasingly popular storm and fertility god Baal. This era of flourishing independent city-states, marked by military prowess and cultural innovation, laid the foundations for the distinct Canaanite civilization that would soon face the rising power of the Egyptian New Kingdom. The era of independent Canaanite city-states came to an end around 1550 BC with the rise of the expansionist 18th dynasty of Egypt. The pharaohs of the New Kingdom, having expelled the Hyksos and secured their borders, embarked on a series of aggressive military campaigns into the Levant. Pharaoh Thutmose III, in particular, solidified Egyptian control through his victory at the Battle of Megiddo in the 15th century BC, a campaign meticulously recorded in the annals at Karnak. This victory inaugurated nearly 4 centuries of Egyptian hegemony over Canaan. Egypt did not rule its new province through direct annexation, but established a system of vassalage. Local Canaanite kings were permitted to remain on their thrones, but they were forced to swear oaths of fealty to the pharaoh, pay substantial annual tribute, and provide troops for Egyptian campaigns. To enforce this system, Egypt established a network of administrative centers and military garrisons at strategic locations such as Gaza, Jaffa, and Beth Shean, which controlled key trade routes and monitored the activities of the local rulers. A remarkable window into the political life of this period is provided by the Amarna letters, a cache of several hundred cuneiform tablets discovered in Egypt. This diplomatic archive, written in Akkadian, the international language of the day, consists largely of correspondence between the pharaohs Amenhotep III and Akhenaten and their Canaanite vassals. The letters reveal a world of constant intrigue and petty rivalry among the local princes. Rulers like Abdi Heba of Jerusalem and Rib Hadda of Byblos wrote constantly to the Egyptian court, professing their unwavering loyalty while accusing their neighbors of treachery and rebellion. They frequently begged for Egyptian troops to settle local disputes or to protect them from the incursions of nomadic groups known as the Habiru. This system allowed Egypt to maintain control through a strategy of divide and rule, keeping the Canaanite city-states too weak and divided to mount a unified challenge to pharaonic authority. The prolonged Egyptian presence fostered a cosmopolitan culture among the Canaanite elite, who readily adopted Egyptian artistic styles, religious iconography, and luxury goods as markers of status. Scarab seals, alabaster vessels, and depictions of Egyptian deities became common in the palaces of local rulers. However, by the 12th century BC, Egypt's power began to wane due to internal struggles and external threats, gradually loosening its grip on Canaan and creating a power vacuum that would soon be filled by new peoples, including the Philistines and the Israelites, heralding the end of the Bronze Age. The discovery of over 300 cuneiform tablets at Amarna, Pharaoh Akhenaten's short-lived capital, offers an unparalleled, first-hand account of the political dynamics within late Bronze Age Canaan. This diplomatic archive, composed in Akkadian, the international lingua franca of the era, primarily contains the correspondence sent from Canaanite vassal rulers to their Egyptian overlords. The letters are formulaic in their introductions, with local kings addressing the pharaoh in effusive terms such as "my son," "my god," and prostrating themselves 7 times and 7 times at his feet. This veneer of absolute submission, however, conceals a turbulent reality of incessant local conflict, shifting allegiances, and deep-seated anxiety about the stability of the Egyptian-led system. The bulk of the correspondence consists of desperate pleas for military aid, accusations against neighboring rulers, and detailed reports of local power struggles. Rib Hadda of Byblos, the most prolific of the correspondents, sent dozens of letters chronicling his city's slow strangulation by the expansionist king of Amurru, all while begging for Egyptian archers and supplies that rarely materialized. Another prominent theme is the threat posed by the Habiru, or Apiru, a term that appears to denote not a cohesive ethnic group, but a marginalized social element of outlaws, mercenaries, and displaced peoples operating outside the city-state system. Vassal kings frequently blame the Habiru for raids on their territory and for destabilizing the region, often accusing their rivals of collaborating with these groups to further their own ambitions. Abdi Heba of Jerusalem writes to defend himself against such accusations, insisting on his personal appointment by the pharaoh and warning that the entire land is on the verge of being lost to the Habiru if Egypt does not intervene decisively. The letters reveal an Egyptian imperial administration that was often remote and seemingly indifferent to the daily squabbles of its vassals, provided the flow of tribute grain, goods, and personnel continued uninterrupted. The pharaoh's responses, when they are alluded to, are often dismissive, chiding the local kings for their constant complaining. This policy effectively kept the Canaanite principalities weak and divided, unable to form a unified front that could challenge Egyptian authority. The Amarna archive thus provides a vivid snapshot of a fragmented political landscape, teetering on the edge of chaos and managed by a distant superpower, setting the stage for the systemic collapse that would soon engulf the entire eastern Mediterranean. Around 1200 BC, the intricate network of empires and trade that defined the Late Bronze Age experienced a rapid and violent disintegration across the eastern Mediterranean. This systemic collapse, attributed to a combination of factors including climate change, internal rebellions, and widespread population movements, saw the fall of the Hittite Empire in Anatolia, the destruction of major trading hubs like Ugarit in Syria, and the severe weakening of New Kingdom Egypt. Egyptian records, particularly the reliefs at Ramesses III's mortuary temple at Medinet Habu, document invasions by a coalition of migratory groups collectively termed the Sea Peoples. These groups, identified by names such as the Checker, Shurden, and Denyen, are depicted in naval and land battles, their incursions disrupting the final vestiges of Egyptian imperial control in the Levant. The societal upheaval was profound, characterized by the destruction of major Canaanite cities, the abandonment of settlements, and the collapse of the international trade routes that had supplied the raw materials for bronze production, effectively ending an era. Among the confederation of Sea Peoples were a group the Egyptians called the Peliset, who are almost universally identified by scholars as the Philistines. After being repelled in their attempt to invade Egypt directly, these groups were settled by Ramesses III, or settled themselves, along the southern coastal plain of Canaan. There they established a powerful league of 5 city-states known as the Philistine Pentapolis: Ashdod, Ashkelon, Ekron, Gath, and Gaza. Archaeologically, their arrival is marked by a sudden and dramatic shift in material culture. They introduced a distinctive style of pottery, closely related to Mycenaean traditions from the Aegean, initially monochrome and later developing into a unique bichrome ware decorated with geometric patterns and stylized birds. Their urban planning, domestic architecture, and religious cultic objects also show clear Aegean parallels, setting them apart from the surrounding Canaanite populations. Crucially, the Philistines brought with them advanced metallurgical knowledge, specifically the technology of iron smelting. Their ability to produce iron weapons and tools gave them a significant military and economic advantage in the emerging Iron Age, allowing them to consolidate their territory and project power into the interior highlands, filling the political vacuum left by the collapse of Egyptian authority and setting the stage for conflict with the region's other new inhabitants. Contemporaneous with the Philistine settlement on the coastal plain, a distinct societal development was taking place in the sparsely populated central hill country of Canaan. During the early Iron Age, from roughly 1200 to 1000 BC, archaeological surveys have documented a dramatic increase in population, with the establishment of over 300 small, unfortified agricultural villages in an area that previously held only a few dozen settlements. These new communities were characterized by a unique cluster of architectural and material traits. A common dwelling was the 4-room house, a rectangular stone structure with a central courtyard and 3 or 4 adjoining rooms, well suited for an extended family and their livestock. Another key marker is the prevalence of the collared rim storage jar, a large ceramic vessel whose distinctive neck was designed for transport and storage. The expansion into the highlands was made possible by new technologies, including the widespread use of rock-cut cisterns lined with waterproof plaster to collect rainwater, allowing for year-round settlement away from natural springs. The material culture of these sites was generally simple, lacking the imported luxury goods found in coastal cities. And notably, zooarchaeological analysis consistently shows an almost complete absence of pig bones, a dietary distinction from surrounding cultures. This archaeological picture of a new village-based society in the highlands is complemented by a crucial piece of textual evidence from Egypt. The Merneptah Stele, a granite monument dated to approximately 1208 BC, commemorates the military victories of Pharaoh Merneptah. In a poetic passage describing his campaign in Canaan, the stele proclaims, "Israel is laid waste, its seed is no more." This is the earliest known extra-biblical reference to a group named Israel. Significantly, the hieroglyphic determinative used with the name Israel is the one for a foreign people or tribe, not for a city-state or a kingdom, which aligns perfectly with the archaeological evidence of a non-urban, tribal society emerging in the hill country at precisely this time. The convergence of this textual mention with the wave of new settlements has led most modern scholars to move away from the biblical narrative of a military conquest from outside Canaan. Instead, the evidence points toward an indigenous origin, suggesting that the first Israelites were likely former Canaanite pastoralists and peasants who withdrew from the collapsing city-state system of the lowlands to forge a new, more egalitarian society in the political vacuum of the highlands. By the 10th century BC, the loose tribal confederation of the Israelite highlands began a process of political centralization, transitioning into a nascent monarchy. The primary catalyst for this state formation, according to the biblical narrative, was escalating military pressure from the Philistine city-states. The Philistines, with their superior iron weaponry and organized military structure, expanded from the coastal plain into the hill country, threatening the autonomy of the highland villages. This external threat necessitated a more unified and permanent form of leadership than the charismatic, temporary judges of the earlier period. The first individual anointed as king was Saul, a figure from the tribe of Benjamin, whose reign is depicted as a transitional phase. He operated less like a monarch of a fully formed state and more like a powerful tribal chieftain, leading military campaigns but lacking a centralized bureaucracy, a standing army, or a formal capital. His reign ultimately ended in military defeat against the Philistines at Mount Gilboa, paving the way for a more robust form of kingship under his successor. David is credited with consolidating the kingdom and transforming it into a true state. His most significant achievement was the capture of Jerusalem, a Jebusite stronghold that had remained independent. Its strategic location on the border between the northern and southern tribes made it a neutral and ideal capital, unifying the disparate tribal factions under his rule. He established a central administration, organized a professional army, and expanded the kingdom's territory through a series of successful military campaigns against surrounding peoples. While direct archaeological evidence for a vast Davidic empire remains limited and is the subject of intense scholarly debate, a crucial piece of extra-biblical evidence validates his historical significance. The Tel Dan Stele, an Aramaic inscription discovered in northern Israel and dated to the 9th century BC, mentions a king from the house of David, confirming the existence of a Davidic dynasty less than a century after his reign. David's son, Solomon, is portrayed as overseeing the kingdom's zenith, a period of peace, prosperity, and monumental construction funded by extensive trade networks and a sophisticated taxation system. The crowning achievement of his reign was the construction of the first temple in Jerusalem, which centralized Israelite worship and became the focal point of national religious identity. Archaeologically, evidence for a 10th century state is visible in the monumental architecture found at key sites like Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer, which feature remarkably similar six-chambered gates, suggesting a standardized architectural plan implemented by a central authority. Following the death of Solomon around 930 BC, the United Monarchy fractured, succumbing to long-standing tribal tensions exacerbated by the fiscal and labor policies of his reign. The northern tribes, rejecting the authority of Solomon's son Rehoboam, seceded to form the independent northern kingdom of Israel, while the southern tribes of Judah and Benjamin remained loyal to the Davidic dynasty, forming the southern kingdom of Judah. This political schism resulted in two rival Hebrew states that would coexist, compete, and occasionally cooperate for the next 2 centuries. The northern kingdom of Israel was geographically larger, more populous, and economically more prosperous, controlling fertile agricultural lands and crucial international trade routes. Its political history was marked by instability, with multiple dynastic changes and frequent assassinations. Its capital shifted several times before King Omri established the formidable city of Samaria in the 9th century. The Omride dynasty, particularly under Omri and his son Ahab, elevated Israel to a major regional power, a fact corroborated by extra-biblical sources. The Mesha Stele, a Moabite inscription, records King Omri's subjugation of Moab, while Assyrian records consistently refer to Israel as the House of Omri, attesting to the dynasty's international prominence. Archaeologically, the wealth of the northern kingdom is evident in the impressive fortifications and Phoenician-style ivory carvings excavated at Samaria. The southern kingdom of Judah was smaller, more geographically isolated in the Judean highlands, and possessed a more homogeneous population. Its capital remained Jerusalem, which housed the first temple, the institutional center of its religious life. Politically, Judah was defined by its remarkable dynastic stability, with the House of David ruling in an unbroken line for nearly 400 years. This continuity provided a strong ideological foundation for the kingdom. Judah's economy was more modest, based on pastoralism and agriculture in the less fertile hill country, and its material culture, as revealed by archaeology, generally lacks the cosmopolitan luxury goods found in the north. The relationship between the two kingdoms was complex, ranging from periods of open warfare to strategic alliances against common foes, most notably the Aramean kingdom of Damascus. To consolidate his kingdom's religious independence from Jerusalem, Israel's first king, Jeroboam I, established alternative cultic centers at Dan and Bethel, a move that biblical writers condemned, but which reflected the political realities of the division. For 2 centuries, these two sister kingdoms, with their shared heritage but divergent political and religious paths, would dominate the history of the southern Levant. The late 8th century BC was dominated by the westward expansion of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, a formidable and highly militarized state centered in northern Mesopotamia. Employing advanced siege technology, a professional standing army, and brutal psychological warfare, the Assyrians systematically subjugated the smaller kingdoms of the Levant. The northern kingdom of Israel, embroiled in regional anti-Assyrian coalitions, became a primary target. The campaigns began under Tiglath-Pileser III, who turned Israel into a vassal state, exacting heavy tribute. Subsequent rebellions led to a final, decisive response. In 722 BC, after a 3-year siege initiated by Shalmaneser V and completed by his successor Sargon II, the capital city of Samaria fell. Assyrian policy towards rebellious subjects was methodical and unforgiving. They implemented a strategy of mass deportation, removing the Israelite elite scribes, priests, artisans, and aristocrats, and resettling them in other parts of the empire. This practice was designed to break national identity and eliminate future resistance. The Assyrian royal annals and palace reliefs meticulously document these conquests, celebrating the destruction of enemy cities and the long lines of deportees. This event marked the end of the northern kingdom of Israel as a political entity, scattering its leading tribes across the Near East and giving rise to the historical concept of the 10 lost tribes. The kingdom of Judah, now a direct neighbor to an Assyrian province, initially submitted to vassalage. However, under King Hezekiah, Judah attempted to break free from Assyrian control. This rebellion prompted a massive punitive campaign by the Assyrian king Sennacherib in 701 BC. Sennacherib's forces swept through Judah, systematically destroying 46 fortified cities and numerous smaller towns. The brutal siege and conquest of the city of Lachish is vividly depicted in stone reliefs that once adorned Sennacherib's palace at Nineveh. The campaign culminated in the siege of Jerusalem itself, Sennacherib's own account, inscribed on what is known as the Taylor Prism, boasts, "As for Hezekiah the Judean, I besieged 46 of his strong walled cities. Himself, like a caged bird, I shut up in Jerusalem, his royal city." While the Assyrian account details the immense tribute Hezekiah paid to lift the siege, the biblical narrative attributes the city's salvation to a miraculous divine intervention that decimated the Assyrian army. Regardless of the precise cause, whether tribute, plague, or a combination of factors, Jerusalem was spared destruction. Judah survived, but as a severely weakened vassal state, its territory diminished and its economy shattered, now living entirely under the shadow of Assyrian imperial power. The waning power of the Neo-Assyrian Empire in the late 7th century BC created a power vacuum in the Levant, soon filled by the ascendant Neo-Babylonian Empire under its ambitious king, Nebuchadnezzar II. The kingdom of Judah, having survived Assyrian domination, found itself precariously positioned between the Babylonians and their regional rivals, the Egyptians. This geopolitical vice tightened after King Josiah of Judah was killed in 609 BC while attempting to intercept Egyptian forces. His successors became entangled in the imperial struggle, ultimately leading King Jehoiakim to rebel against his Babylonian overlords. Nebuchadnezzar's response was swift. In 597 BC, his army besieged Jerusalem. King Jehoiakim died during the siege, and his young successor, Jehoiakim, surrendered the city. The Babylonians implemented the first phase of their imperial policy, a targeted deportation. They exiled the king, his court, the military elite, and thousands of skilled craftsmen to Babylon. This event, corroborated by the Babylonian Chronicle, which records the capture of the city of Judah and its king, was a strategic decapitation designed to remove Judah's leadership and artisan class, leaving behind a compliant vassal state. Nebuchadnezzar installed Zedekiah, Jehoiachin's uncle, as a puppet king in Jerusalem. However, after nearly a decade, internal political pressure from nationalist and pro-Egyptian factions pushed Zedekiah into a final, ill-fated rebellion. The Babylonian response was no longer punitive but annihilatory. Nebuchadnezzar's army returned and laid siege to Jerusalem for a second time, a grueling campaign that lasted approximately 18 months. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals layers of destruction and caches of arrowheads at various Judean sites, attesting to the widespread conflict. The prolonged siege resulted in severe famine and the eventual collapse of the city's defenses. In 587 or 586 BC, the Babylonian army breached the walls and systematically dismantled the Judean state. The city of Jerusalem was razed, and its defensive walls were torn down. Most significantly, the Babylonians destroyed the first temple of Solomon, the central institution of Judah's religious, cultural, and national identity, for 4 centuries. Following the destruction, a second, larger deportation was carried out, removing a significant portion of the remaining population. Unlike the Assyrian practice of scattering conquered peoples, the Babylonians settled the Judean exiles in concentrated communities in Babylonia, such as Tel Aviv on the banks of the Chebar Canal. This policy, while intended to control the population, inadvertently allowed the exiles to maintain their communal structures and religious traditions, a crucial factor for their cultural survival and the subsequent development of Judaism during the exilic period. Judah was reduced to the Babylonian province of Yehud, its monarchy extinguished and its land desolate. The geopolitical landscape of the Near East was fundamentally altered in 539 BC, when Cyrus the Great, founder of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, conquered Babylon. The Persians inaugurated a new imperial policy, a stark departure from the brutal methods of their Assyrian and Babylonian predecessors. This policy, articulated in administrative documents like the Cyrus Cylinder, promoted a form of multicultural tolerance, allowing deported peoples to return to their homelands and restore their local religious cults. For the Judean exiles in Babylonia, this imperial decree provided the legal and political framework for a restoration. The initial return was not a mass popular migration, but a smaller, officially sanctioned expedition led by figures like Sheshbazzar, identified as a Prince of Judah. This first wave, comprising mainly priestly and scribal elites, was tasked with re-establishing the community and laying the groundwork for a new temple, a project financially subsidized by the Persian royal treasury. The returnees arrived in a sparsely populated and economically devastated land, which the Persians administered as the province of Yehud Medinata. They faced significant challenges, including the difficult task of rebuilding a ruined infrastructure and navigating complex relationships with the diverse populations who had remained in the land or settled there during the exile. Tensions arose with neighboring provincial authorities, particularly the Samaritans to the north, who initially sought to participate in the temple project but were rebuffed, leading to political friction that would persist for centuries. The actual reconstruction of the temple stalled for nearly 2 decades due to these local conflicts and a lack of resources. A second, more organized wave of returnees under the leadership of Zerubbabel, a descendant of the Davidic line, and the high priest Joshua, provided new impetus for the project. Spurred on by the prophetic exhortations of Haggai and Zechariah, and with renewed authorization from the Persian king Darius I, construction resumed in earnest. The second temple was completed and dedicated around 516 or 515 BC. While it was a more modest structure than Solomon's opulent sanctuary, its completion was an event of immense significance. It re-established Jerusalem as the undisputed center of Judean religious life and became the focal point for the developing post-exilic community. This period marked a pivotal shift in identity, with religious authority centered on the temple priesthood and the interpretation of sacred texts, the Torah, gradually supplanting the political authority of the defunct monarchy. The province of Yehud remained a small, semi-autonomous entity within the vast Persian satrapy of beyond the river, its existence and stability dependent on the administrative and military protection of the Achaemenid Empire. 2 centuries of stable Achaemenid Persian administration came to an abrupt end with the arrival of the Macedonian army under Alexander the Great. After consolidating his control over Greece and Anatolia, Alexander decisively defeated the Persian king Darius III at the Battle of Issus in 333 BC. This victory opened the entire Levant to his highly disciplined forces, which combined the deep formations of the sarissa-wielding phalanx with heavy cavalry and sophisticated siege corps. The swiftness of the Macedonian advance caused most cities along the Levantine coast to capitulate, transferring their allegiance from the Persians to the new conqueror. For the semi-autonomous province of Yehud, this transition was largely administrative, a change of distant imperial masters that initially had little impact on the internal governance centered around the high priesthood in Jerusalem. However, not all city-states submitted peacefully. The Phoenician island fortress of Tyre mounted a determined resistance, leading to a legendary 7-month siege. Alexander's military engineers constructed a massive causeway, or mole, from the mainland to the island, deployed advanced siege towers on naval vessels, and eventually breached the city's formidable walls. The subsequent sack of Tyre was brutal, a calculated act of deterrence against future defiance. Further south, the city of Gaza, a key Persian administrative and military hub, also resisted. Its commander, Battis, endured a 2-month siege before the city fell, resulting in another wave of destruction and enslavement. These episodes demonstrated the futility of opposing the Macedonian military machine and secured Alexander's control over the strategic coastal highway leading to Egypt. Alexander's project was not one of mere conquest. It was the catalyst for a profound cultural transformation known as Hellenization. He founded new cities, polis, designed on a Greek model with gymnasia, theatres, and agoras, and settled them with his veterans. The most influential of these was Alexandria in Egypt, which quickly became the preeminent commercial and intellectual centre of the Eastern Mediterranean. The introduction of the Greek language, Koine Greek, as the lingua franca of administration, commerce, and intellectual discourse, began a process of cultural synthesis. Greek philosophy, art, political thought, and social customs started to permeate the societies of the Levant. For the Judeans in Yehud, this marked the beginning of a prolonged and complex encounter with Hellenism, a powerful and attractive cosmopolitan culture that would both challenge and reshape their own traditions in the centuries to come. Alexander's premature death in 323 BC did not reverse this process. Instead, it plunged his vast empire into decades of conflict as his generals, the Diadochi, fought for control, turning Palestine into a contested borderland between rival Hellenistic kingdoms. The death of Alexander the Great in 323 BC inaugurated nearly half a century of continuous warfare, as his generals, the Diadochi, vied for control of his fragmented empire. Palestine, due to its strategic position as the land bridge between Egypt and Asia, became a primary theatre of conflict. The region changed hands at least 5 times during these wars, primarily contested by Ptolemy I Soter, who had secured control of Egypt, and Antigonus I Monophthalmus, who initially dominated much of Asia. The decisive Battle of Ipsus in 301 BC solidified the division of the empire, with Ptolemy establishing a dynasty in Egypt that would control Palestine for the next century. Under the Ptolemaic kingdom, the region was administratively organized as a subdivision of the satrapy of Coele-Syria, or Hollow Syria. Ptolemaic rule was characterized by a highly centralized and efficient bureaucracy focused on maximizing tax revenue. The Xenon Papyri, a cache of documents from a 3rd century BC Ptolemaic official, provide an invaluable record of this system, detailing everything from agricultural production quotas and tax farming contracts to the state control of trade in oil and textiles. This period saw an acceleration of Hellenization, but it was largely a pragmatic top-down process driven by administrative and economic integration rather than forced cultural conversion. Greek became the language of government, and new Hellenistic cities, like Ptolemy Akko and Philadelphia, modern Amman, were founded or refounded to serve as military and administrative centers. For the Judeans in Yehud, Ptolemaic oversight was generally unobtrusive, allowing the high priest in Jerusalem to continue managing most internal affairs, provided that taxes were delivered reliably. However, the constant imperial rivalry meant that stability was temporary. The Seleucid Empire, based in Syria and Mesopotamia, never relinquished its claim to Coele-Syria, leading to a series of 5 Syrian wars fought throughout the 3rd century. The balance of power shifted decisively around 200 BC, when the Seleucid king Antiochus III the Great defeated the Ptolemaic forces at the Battle of Panium, near the headwaters of the Jordan River. This victory transferred control of Palestine from the Ptolemies to the Seleucids. Seleucid administration was often less stable and more financially pressed than that of the Ptolemies, partly due to their ongoing and costly conflicts with the expanding Roman Republic in the west. This financial strain led the Seleucids to seek new revenue sources, including intervening more directly in the affairs of local temple states like Jerusalem. The office of the high priest became increasingly politicized, with rival Judean factions vying for the position by offering larger tributes to their Seleucid overlords. This intensified internal division and set the stage for a more aggressive phase of Hellenization that would ultimately spark a violent rebellion. The internal Judean divisions under Seleucid rule reached a crisis point during the reign of Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Facing severe financial pressure after a humiliating defeat by the Romans in Egypt, Antiochus sought to plunder the Jerusalem temple treasury and intensify his control. He supported a radical Hellenizing faction within the Judean elite, deposing the traditional high priest and auctioning the office to the highest bidder, first to Jason and then to Menelaus, who promised greater revenues and a more aggressive program of cultural assimilation. This intervention culminated in 167 BC with a series of royal decrees that outlawed fundamental Jewish religious practices. The observance of the Sabbath, traditional festivals, dietary laws, and circumcision were proscribed under penalty of death. An altar to Zeus Olympios was erected within the temple precinct, an act of desecration that served as the immediate catalyst for armed insurrection. The rebellion did not begin in the politicized capital, but in the rural town of Modian, led by an elderly priest named Mattathias of the Hasmonean family. When a Seleucid official attempted to enforce the royal decree by commanding a public sacrifice to a pagan deity, Mattathias refused. He killed not only the official, but also a Hellenizing Jew who complied with the order, sparking a localized uprising. Mattathias and his 5 sons John, Simon, Judas, Eleazar, and Jonathan fled into the rugged Gophna Hills, where they began to organize a guerrilla resistance. After his father's death, leadership passed to his son Judas, who earned the epithet Maccabeus, meaning the hammer. Judas proved to be a brilliant military strategist, leveraging his followers' intimate knowledge of the terrain to ambush and defeat much larger and better equipped Seleucid professional armies. Using surprise attacks and night raids, his forces won a series of improbable victories at battles such as Emmaus and Beth Zur, disrupting Seleucid control over the Judean countryside. These military successes allowed Judas Maccabeus to advance on Jerusalem in 164 BC. He captured the city, although a Seleucid garrison held out in the Acra fortress for years to come. His forces immediately cleansed and rededicated the desecrated temple, an event commemorated in the ongoing Jewish festival of Hanukkah. The character of the war gradually shifted from a fight for religious freedom to a struggle for political sovereignty. After Judas fell in battle, his brothers Jonathan and Simon continued the campaign. They skillfully exploited the persistent succession crises and civil wars plaguing the declining Seleucid Empire, playing rival claimants against each other to gain political and military concessions. The breakthrough came under Simon, who in 142 BC secured a grant of tax exemption and the right to mint coinage from the Seleucid king Demetrius II. In 141 BC, a great assembly in Jerusalem formally recognized Simon as high priest, ethnarch, and military commander, establishing the Hasmonean dynasty as the hereditary rulers of a newly independent Judean state, the first in over 4 centuries. The independent Hasmonean kingdom, forged in a war for religious freedom, ultimately succumbed to internal decay and the inexorable expansion of a new Mediterranean superpower. The century of sovereignty was undone not by external invasion, but by a dynastic civil war that invited foreign intervention. Following the death of Queen Salome Alexandra in 67 BC, her 2 sons, Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II, immediately engaged in a destructive conflict for the throne. Hyrcanus, the elder, held the legitimate claim and the high priesthood, but lacked political ambition and military skill. Aristobulus, the younger, was energetic and popular with the military, and he quickly deposed his brother, seizing both royal and priestly authority. The deposed Hyrcanus was persuaded to fight back by the ambitious Idumean governor, Antipater the Great, father of the future Herod. Their struggle devolved into a protracted war that weakened the kingdom and divided its populace. This internal strife coincided with the arrival of Roman military power in the region. The Roman general Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, or Pompey the Great, was in the east, fresh from his conclusive victory in the Third Mithridatic War and the final dismantling of the Seleucid Empire, which he reorganized into the Roman province of Syria in 64 BC. The Hasmonean conflict presented a perfect opportunity for Rome to extend its influence. Both Hyrcanus and Aristobulus, in a fatal miscalculation, appealed directly to Pompey to arbitrate their dispute, each sending delegations with lavish gifts and arguments for their legitimacy. Pompey, recognizing the strategic advantage of installing a compliant local ruler, delayed his judgment while assessing the situation. He ultimately sided with the weaker and more malleable Hyrcanus II. When Aristobulus II defied this decision and fortified himself in Jerusalem, he provided Pompey with the pretext for direct military intervention. In 63 BC, Roman legions marched on the city. The siege was hastened by internal divisions. Supporters of Hyrcanus opened the city gates to the Romans, allowing them to occupy the lower city. The faction loyal to Aristobulus made a final desperate stand on the heavily fortified Temple Mount. The Romans conducted a systematic 3-month siege, bringing up their advanced artillery and siege engines to batter the temple's defences. After the walls were breached, a massacre ensued within the sacred precincts. In a profound act of sacrilege, Pompey himself entered the temple, penetrating even the Holy of Holies, the innermost sanctuary forbidden to all but the high priest. While he left the temple treasury intact, his actions symbolically shattered Judean autonomy. Aristobulus was arrested and sent to Rome for Pompey's triumph. Hyrcanus was reinstated as high priest but stripped of his royal title, and the Hasmonean kingdom was reduced to a small tributary client state under the authority of the Roman governor of Syria. Hasmonean independence was over. The era following the Roman conquest was dominated by the singular figure of Herod, son of the Idumean governor Antipater. His rise to power was a masterclass in political survival and opportunism amidst the chaos of Rome's own civil wars. After Antipater's assassination, Herod and his brother Phasael initially governed as tetrarchs under Hyrcanus II, but their authority was challenged by a Parthian invasion in 40 BC, which installed the Hasmonean prince Antigonus II as king. Fleeing to Rome, Herod skillfully lobbied the Senate, securing the support of the ruling triumvirate of Mark Antony and Octavian. In an unprecedented move, the Senate formally declared Herod the king of Judea, entrusting him with the task of conquering his own kingdom. Over the next 3 years, with the crucial support of Roman legions, Herod waged a brutal war against Antigonus, culminating in a difficult siege of Jerusalem in 37 BC that ended with his final victory and the execution of the last Hasmonean ruler. Herod's reign, from 37 to 4 BC, was that of a quintessential Roman client king. He maintained absolute internal autonomy, but owed his throne entirely to Roman patronage, a debt he repaid with unwavering loyalty, first to Antony, and then, after the Battle of Actium, to the triumphant Octavian, who became Emperor Augustus. His primary functions were to ensure regional stability, secure the empire's eastern frontier against Parthia, and deliver consistent tax revenues. To achieve this, he eliminated all Hasmonean claimants to the throne and suppressed internal dissent with a highly effective secret police and a network of fortresses. His reign was defined by an unparalleled building program funded by heavy taxation and the income from his vast personal estates. His most famous project was the complete and lavish reconstruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, transforming it into one of the most magnificent structures in the ancient world. His architectural ambitions extended across his kingdom. He constructed the port city of Caesarea Maritima, an engineering marvel with an artificial deep-water harbour dedicated to his patron Augustus. He also built or rebuilt numerous other cities, such as Sebaste, formerly Samaria, and adorned them with Roman-style theatres, amphitheatres, and aqueducts. For his own security, he erected a series of formidable fortress palaces in strategic and isolated locations, including Masada, the mountaintop stronghold of Herodium, which also served as his tomb, and Machaerus. Yet, this architectural legacy was built on a foundation of paranoia and brutality. An Idumean outsider ruling over a resentful Judean populace, he lived in constant fear of conspiracy. This led him to execute numerous perceived rivals, including his beloved Hasmonean wife Mariamne, several of his own sons, and countless members of the aristocracy. By his death, he had forged a stable, prosperous, and architecturally renewed kingdom, but one that was deeply alienated from its ruler, leaving behind a legacy of both brilliance and terror. The death of Herod the Great in 4 BC did not bring stability, but rather a fragmentation of his kingdom and a new, more direct form of Roman administration. In accordance with his will, which was ratified by Emperor Augustus, his territory was divided among his 3 surviving sons. Archelaus was made ethnarch over the core territories of Judea, Samaria, and Idumea. Herod Antipas became tetrarch of Galilee and Perea, and Philip was appointed tetrarch over the northeastern regions. Archelaus's rule proved disastrously inept and brutal, leading a delegation of Judean and Samaritan nobles to appeal directly to Rome for his removal. In 6 CE, Augustus responded by deposing Archelaus and exiling him to Gaul. His territory was then reorganized into the Roman province of Iudea, governed by a succession of prefects from the equestrian class who were based in the coastal city of Caesarea Maritima and answered to the imperial legate in Syria. This new political arrangement placed the majority of the Jewish population under direct Roman military and fiscal control. The first census, conducted under the governor Quirinius to establish a basis for taxation, sparked immediate and violent resistance, giving rise to the anti-Roman movement of the Zealots. The social and religious landscape of this period was complex and fractious. The Sadducees, comprising the wealthy priestly families who controlled the temple cult in Jerusalem, were theologically conservative and politically pragmatic, collaborating with the Roman authorities to maintain the status quo and their own privileged position. In contrast, the Pharisees were a lay movement with significant popular support, whose authority was based on their scholarly interpretation of both the written Torah and an extensive body of oral law. Their influence was centered in the synagogues that functioned as local centers of worship and education. Beyond these two main groups were others, like the Essenes, an ascetic sect who rejected the temple establishment as corrupt and often withdrew into communal settlements, such as the one at Qumran, to live a life of ritual purity while awaiting a final eschatological conflict. The political and religious ferment of the era created fertile ground for itinerant preachers and messianic figures. It was within this specific context a Galilee ruled by the Herodian client Antipas and a Judea administered by the Roman prefect Pontius Pilate that Jesus of Nazareth began his ministry. His teachings on the kingdom of God resonated in a society burdened by dual taxation to Rome and the temple, and simmering with apocalyptic expectation and deep resentment toward foreign occupation. The simmering resentment under Roman rule finally erupted into open rebellion in 66 CE, ignited by decades of fiscal exploitation and a series of corrupt, provocative Roman procurators. The immediate catalyst was the procurator Gessius Florus, who plundered 17 talents of silver from the Second Temple's treasury, an act of sacrilege that united disparate factions in Jerusalem. The rebellion was formalized when the temple captain Eleazar ben Hananiah persuaded the priesthood to cease the daily sacrifices offered on behalf of the Roman emperor, a direct renunciation of imperial authority. Initial rebel successes were stunning. They overwhelmed the Roman garrison in Jerusalem and annihilated a relief force sent by the Syrian legate Cestius Gallus at the Battle of Beth Horon, a victory that emboldened the revolt across the entire province. In response, Emperor Nero dispatched the veteran general Titus Flavius Vespasianus, or Vespasian, with a force of 3 legions, totaling some 60 professional soldiers and auxiliaries. Vespasian's strategy, initiated in 67 CE, was not a direct assault on Jerusalem, but a methodical and brutal pacification of the surrounding regions, starting with Galilee. He systematically besieged and destroyed rebel strongholds, including the fortress of Jotapata, where the Galilean commander Josephus was captured. Josephus would later defect and, under Roman patronage, chronicle the war he once fought. While Vespasian's legions slowly ground down the rebellion in the countryside, the revolutionary government in Jerusalem collapsed into a bloody civil war. Competing zealot factions, led by figures like John of Gishala and Simon Bar Giora, fought each other for control of the city, executing perceived moderates and turning the holy city into a battlefield, a fatal division that catastrophically weakened its defenses. The year of the 4 emperors in Rome, 69 CE, saw Vespasian himself acclaimed emperor by his legions. Leaving to secure his throne, he entrusted the final stage of the war to his son Titus. In the spring of 70 CE, Titus arrived at Jerusalem with 4 legions and began one of the most difficult sieges in Roman history. He systematically breached the city's formidable triple walls, while inside, the warring Jewish factions, only united in the final, desperate moments. The Romans captured the Antonia fortress, which overlooked the Temple Mount, and after intense fighting, stormed the sacred precinct itself. In August of 70 CE, amid the chaos of the final assault, the Second Temple was set ablaze and utterly destroyed. The city was razed, its population massacred or enslaved, and the central institution of Judaism for over 5 centuries ceased to exist, an event that would irrevocably reshape its future. The fragile peace following the first revolt was shattered 60 years later by a second, far more organized and desperate rebellion. Tensions had remained high, punctuated by the widespread, but ultimately suppressed Quito's War of 115-117 CE. The final impetus for the second major revolt came from the policies of Emperor Hadrian, who visited the region around 130 CE. His decisions to establish a new Roman colony, Aelia Capitolina, upon the ruins of Jerusalem, and his plan to construct a temple dedicated to Jupiter Capitolinus directly on the site of the destroyed Jewish temple were seen as the ultimate provocations. These acts, possibly coupled with an imperial edict banning circumcision, were interpreted as a direct assault on the core tenets of Jewish religious and national identity, mobilizing a unified and widespread resistance. The leadership of this new uprising fell to Simon Bar Kokhba, a charismatic and authoritarian military commander who was proclaimed the Messiah, or Bar Kokhba, son of a star, by the influential sage Rabbi Akiva, lending the revolt a powerful eschatological fervor. The Bar Kokhba revolt, from 132 to 136 CE, was meticulously planned. Unlike the first revolt, the rebels did not attempt to hold major fortified cities. Instead, they waged a highly effective guerrilla war from the Judean hill country, utilizing a vast, pre-prepared network of subterranean hideout complexes and interconnected tunnels. Archaeological discoveries of these systems reveal sophisticated defensive planning. For a time, their strategy was remarkably successful. They inflicted severe casualties on Roman forces, reportedly annihilating the entire Legio XXII Diotariana, and managed to establish an independent statelet in Judea for over 2 years. Evidence of this proto-state includes letters and administrative documents discovered in desert caves, as well as the minting of unique coinage, where rebel slogans like "For the Freedom of Jerusalem" were overstruck on Roman currency, a clear act of sovereign defiance. The scale of the rebellion forced Hadrian to mobilize an unprecedented military force, drawing 12 legions, nearly half the Roman army, under the command of his most capable general, Sextus Julius Severus, recalled from Britain. Severus eschewed direct battles, adopting a slow, systematic strategy of attrition. Roman forces surrounded and isolated rebel-held areas, destroyed agricultural infrastructure to induce famine, and methodically cleared the cave hideouts. The final stand of the rebellion occurred at the fortress of Betar, southwest of Jerusalem, which fell in 135 CE after a prolonged siege, resulting in the death of Bar Kokhba. The aftermath was catastrophic. Roman sources describe the near-total devastation of Judea, with hundreds of thousands killed and countless more sold into slavery. As a final punitive measure, Hadrian officially renamed the province from Judea to Syria Palestina, a deliberate attempt to sever the connection between the Jewish people and the land by reviving a name associated with the ancient Philistines. Following the utter suppression of the Bar Kokhba revolt, the province of Syria Palestina entered a long period of enforced stability under direct and uncompromising Roman rule. The catastrophic demographic losses, particularly in the Judean heartland, created a new reality on the ground, allowing for a systematic and deliberate program of Romanization. This era, extending through the late 2nd and 3rd centuries CE, was characterized by imperial investment in infrastructure and a profound reshaping of the urban landscape. The foundation of Aelia Capitolina on the ruins of Jerusalem was the cornerstone of this policy. It was built as a typical Roman polis, complete with a forum, a Cardo Maximus, temples to Roman deities, and a theatre, but its most significant feature was the explicit exclusion of Jews, who were forbidden from entering the city on pain of death, a ban that underscored the punitive nature of its establishment. This model of urbanization was replicated across the province. The Romans founded or refounded numerous cities to serve as centers of administration and Greco-Roman culture, fundamentally altering the settlement patterns. Cities like Neapolis, modern Nablus, in Samaria, Eleutheropolis, Beit Guvrin in Idumea, and Diocletianopolis, Lydda, Lod, were established or elevated in status, each receiving the standard architectural and institutional template of the empire. An extensive network of high-quality paved roads was constructed, connecting these new urban centers to the provincial capital at Caesarea Maritima and to the wider imperial system. Milestones, many of which have been discovered archaeologically, marked distances and credited the reigning emperor, serving as constant reminders of Roman power and presence. This infrastructure was not merely for convenience. It facilitated the rapid movement of legions, streamlined tax collection, and stimulated commerce, integrating Syria Palestina more deeply into the Mediterranean economy. Under the relative security of the Pax Romana, the province's economy flourished, based primarily on intensive agriculture. Large estates, often owned by imperial favorites or Roman veterans, produced olive oil, wine, grain, and dates for export throughout the empire. The port at Caesarea became a major commercial hub, while inland cities served as market centers for their agricultural hinterlands. While Judea itself was left desolate, the demographic and religious center of Judaism shifted decisively north to Galilee. It was here, in cities like Sepphoris and Tiberias, that the surviving rabbinic class began the monumental intellectual project of compiling and codifying the oral law, a process that would ultimately result in the creation of the Mishnah around 200 CE under the leadership of Judah Hanasi. This foundational text of rabbinic Judaism ensured the religion's survival and transformation in a world without its central temple. Throughout the 2nd and 3rd centuries, while the province of Syria Palestina underwent profound Romanization, the Christian faith developed from a marginal sect into an organized religion. Early communities, initially concentrated in Judea and Galilee, gradually expanded into the Hellenized coastal cities and administrative centers. This growth was often slow and precarious, as the faith was met with suspicion by Roman authorities, who viewed its monotheism and refusal to participate in the imperial cult as civic disobedience. The intellectual life of the faith found a significant center in Caesarea Maritima, where the theologian Origen of Alexandria established a school and a major Christian library in the mid-3rd century. This institution became a hub of biblical scholarship, producing commentaries and textual criticism that were foundational to Christian doctrine, demonstrating a faith developing a sophisticated intellectual tradition parallel to its rabbinic Jewish counterpart in Galilee. This period of quiet growth was punctuated by episodes of intense empire-wide persecution. The edicts of Emperor Decius in 250 CE, and more systematically under Diocletian beginning in 303 CE, aimed to enforce religious conformity and targeted Christian institutions directly. In Syria Palestina, this resulted in the arrest of bishops, the confiscation and burning of sacred texts, and the public execution of those who refused to sacrifice to the Roman gods. The contemporary account by the historian Eusebius of Caesarea, titled Martyrs of Palestine, provides a detailed record of these events, documenting the martyrdoms of figures like Procopius and Pamphilus, and illustrating the organized nature of the state's attempt to eradicate the faith. These persecutions, while brutal, failed to extinguish the Christian communities, instead strengthening their internal cohesion and resolve. The pivotal transformation occurred with the rise of Emperor Constantine I. His conversion to Christianity and the subsequent Edict of Milan in 313 CE, which he co-issued with Licinius, granted the religion legal status and brought an abrupt end to official persecution. This imperial patronage initiated a dramatic reversal of fortune for Christianity. Constantine and his mother Helena launched an unprecedented program of imperial investment in Syria-Palestina, which was now rebranded as the Holy Land. Helena's pilgrimage in 326-328 CE led to the identification and sanctification of sites associated with the life of Jesus. This resulted in a massive church-building campaign, most notably the construction of the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Aelia Capitolina. The latter project involved the demolition of Hadrian's temple to Venus, a powerful symbol of the new religious order. This imperial investment triggered the beginning of large-scale Christian pilgrimage, fundamentally altering the province's economy and demography, and setting the stage for its complete transformation into a Christian heartland. The Constantinian era inaugurated a systematic and state-sponsored Christianization of Syria-Palestina, transforming the province's social, political, and physical landscape. Imperial patronage went beyond mere construction projects. It fundamentally reordered the administrative and religious hierarchy. Bishops, particularly the Bishop of Jerusalem, transitioned from being leaders of a tolerated sect to becoming major figures of state, wielding significant political influence and controlling vast resources allocated by the imperial treasury. This new status was formalized at the First Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, where Macarius of Jerusalem was not only a key participant in the formulation of the Nicene Creed, but was also granted special precedence, officially recognizing the city's unique importance within the imperial church structure. This council integrated the local episcopacy directly into the empire's new religious apparatus, making doctrinal orthodoxy a matter of imperial policy. This period also witnessed the birth and rapid expansion of monasticism, a movement that would become a defining feature of the Holy Land for centuries. Inspired by the Desert Fathers of Egypt, figures like Hilarion the Great established the first monastic communities near Gaza, while others, such as Chariton the Confessor, founded Lavras colonies of hermit cells in the unforgiving landscape of the Judean desert. These monasteries, like Mar Saba and St. George, were not just spiritual retreats. They became significant economic engines and centers of theological learning, attracting thousands of individuals from across the empire. Their growth represented a new demographic force, populating remote areas and creating a permanent institutional Christian presence that was deeply embedded in the land itself. The combination of imperial favor, church construction, and the rise of monasticism spurred a significant demographic shift. The steady stream of pilgrims, encouraged and protected by the state, evolved into a wave of permanent settlers. As Christianity became the clear path to social and political advancement, conversions increased, and by the end of the 4th century, Christians likely constituted the majority of the province's population. This growing dominance was legally reinforced by Constantine's successors. Emperors like Theodosius I enacted legislation that systematically dismantled the remaining pagan infrastructure, ordering the closure or conversion of temples. Concurrently, new laws placed increasing restrictions on the Jewish population, limiting their civic rights, prohibiting the construction of new synagogues, and forbidding them from proselytizing. These legal measures solidified the marginalization of non-Christian communities and cemented the province's identity as the Christian Holy Land, a status it would hold for the next 3 centuries. The administrative reorganization of the Diocese of the East around 409 CE formalized the Holy Land's unique status by dividing the region into distinct provinces: Palestina Prima, encompassing Judea, Samaria, and the coast with its capital at Caesarea; Palestina Secunda, covering Galilee and the Golan with its capital at Scythopolis, be it Shian; and Palestina Tertia, a vast southern territory including the Negev and Sinai, with its capital at Petra. This restructuring reflected the demographic and economic realities of a now thoroughly Christianized region, facilitating more efficient governance and tax collection from a populace centered on pilgrimage and monastic economies. The 5th and 6th centuries, particularly under the reign of Emperor Justinian I, represented the zenith of this Byzantine development. Justinian's legal codifications, the Corpus Juris Civilis, further entrenched the subordinate status of non-Christians, with specific laws severely curtailing the civil liberties of Jews and Samaritans, sparking a series of violent but ultimately unsuccessful Samaritan revolts in 484 and 529 CE, which were brutally suppressed. Imperial patronage continued on a grand scale, moving beyond the foundational sites of the Constantinian era to embellish the landscape with hundreds of new churches, monasteries, and chapels. Justinian's most significant contribution was the Nea Ecclesia of the Theotokos, the new church of the Mother of God, in Jerusalem, dedicated in 543 CE. Its construction was a monumental engineering feat, requiring the creation of massive subterranean vaults to support the structure on the sloping terrain, and its scale was intended to surpass that of the ancient Jewish temple. This era also saw the flourishing of a distinctive artistic tradition, most famously expressed through intricate mosaic floors. These mosaics were not confined to churches, but decorated synagogues, private villas, and public buildings, depicting a wide range of subjects from biblical scenes and geometric patterns to zodiac cycles and detailed depictions of daily life. The Nakba map, a 6th century mosaic floor from a church in modern-day Jordan, stands as a testament to this art form's sophistication, providing an invaluable and detailed cartographic representation of the entire region. The pilgrimage industry became a cornerstone of the provincial economy, now fully institutionalized with a supporting infrastructure of hospices, xenodochia, guest houses, and state-protected travel routes. The accounts of pilgrims like the Spanish nun Egeria from the late 4th century and the anonymous Piacenza pilgrim from the 570s detail a well-trodden circuit of holy sites, each with established liturgies and resident clergy. This constant influx of international visitors brought immense wealth, stimulated trade, and fostered a cosmopolitan atmosphere in cities like Jerusalem. Monasticism simultaneously entered its golden age, with the Judean desert becoming a major center of Orthodox theology and spirituality under the leadership of figures like Sabas the Sanctified. The great lavra he founded, Mar Saba, became an influential institution with hundreds of monks, a major library, and a significant role in the Christological debates, such as the Origenist controversy, that defined the theological landscape of the 5th and 6th century Byzantine Empire. While Byzantine Palestine projected an image of Christian piety, its internal stability was repeatedly challenged by the Samaritan community, a distinct ethno-religious group concentrated in the highlands of Samaria around their sacred site of Mount Gerizim. Their relationship with the imperial state deteriorated sharply throughout the 5th century as Christianization intensified. Imperial policies under emperors like Zeno began to actively interfere with their religious life, culminating in the construction of a church dedicated to Mary, Mother of God, directly on the summit of Mount Gerizim. This act of religious appropriation, coupled with escalating legal discrimination that barred them from public office and military service, created a volatile environment. The simmering resentment erupted into open rebellion in 484 CE under the leadership of a figure named Justa, whom they proclaimed as their king. The revolt saw initial success with the capture of Neapolis, modern Nablus, the killing of the city's bishop, and the destruction of local churches before it was brutally crushed by the Byzantine Dux Palestini, with the crucial assistance of Ghassanid Arab Federate troops. The aftermath was severe. The church on Mount Gerizim was fortified into a military outpost, and punitive measures further restricted Samaritan life. A generation later, the legal framework established by Emperor Justinian I pushed the Samaritan community to a final, desperate uprising. Justinian's comprehensive legal codes of 529 CE went beyond mere restriction, effectively outlawing the Samaritan faith by forbidding the practice of their religion, the reading of their sacred texts, and the inheritance of property by those who did not convert to Christianity. This existential threat triggered the largest and most violent of the revolts, led by Julianus ben Saba. Declared king, Julianus orchestrated a widespread rebellion that engulfed both Palestina Prima and Secunda. Samaritan forces systematically destroyed churches and the estates of wealthy Christian landowners, briefly re-establishing control over their heartland. The Byzantine response, however, was overwhelming and decisive. Justinian dispatched a massive military force, again supported by the Ghassanids, which engaged the Samaritan army and systematically pacified the region. The suppression of the 529 CE revolt was catastrophic for the Samaritan people. Contemporary sources, such as the historian Procopius, record immense casualties, with estimates of over 100 Samaritans killed or sold into slavery throughout the empire, from Persia to Egypt. The demographic collapse was near total. Samaria, once a populous and prosperous region, was left devastated and depopulated. The imperial government followed the military victory with a policy of confiscating Samaritan lands and resettling the area with Christian colonists, permanently altering the character of the central hill country. This final revolt effectively ended the Samaritans as a significant political and demographic force in the region, reducing a once thriving community to a small, persecuted minority. The violent pacification of Samaria represented the brutal consolidation of Byzantine Christian authority, creating a more religiously homogeneous province on the eve of a new and unforeseen challenge from the south. The final and most devastating of the Roman-Persian Wars, 602–628 CE, shattered the stability of Byzantine Palestine, introducing a brief but transformative period of Sasanian rule. The conflict, initiated by the Sasanian Shah Khosrow II, ostensibly to avenge the murder of his ally Emperor Maurice, quickly evolved into a full-scale war of conquest. Under the command of the brilliant general Shahrbaraz, Sasanian armies systematically dismantled Byzantine control in the Near East, capturing Antioch in 611 and Damascus in 613, setting the stage for an invasion of Palestine. The Persian advance was significantly aided by a strategic alliance with the local Jewish population, who viewed the Sasanians as liberators from centuries of oppressive Christian Byzantine rule. Figures like Benjamin of Tiberias, a man of considerable wealth, mobilized a Jewish army from Galilee and the surrounding regions to fight alongside the invading forces, driven by the promise of restored autonomy and the prospect of retaking Jerusalem. The culmination of this campaign was the siege of Jerusalem in 614 CE. After a 21-day assault, the combined Sasanian and Jewish forces breached the city's defenses, leading to a collapse of Byzantine authority. The aftermath, as documented in contemporary Christian sources like the account of the monk Strategios, was severe. A significant portion of the city's Christian population was killed, and thousands more were deported. The Sasanian forces systematically looted the city's holy sites, including the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and seized the most sacred relic of Christendom, the True Cross, which was carried back in triumph to the Sasanian capital, Ctesiphon. The city's patriarch, Zacharias, was also taken into exile. This event sent shockwaves throughout the Christian world, representing a catastrophic symbolic and spiritual defeat for the Byzantine Empire. Following the conquest, the Sasanians initially honored their alliance by entrusting the administration of Jerusalem to their Jewish allies, appointing a leader named Nehemiah ben Hushiel as governor. This period saw the beginning of preparations to construct a new temple and the re-establishment of Jewish religious life in the city. However, this arrangement proved short-lived. For pragmatic reasons of provincial stability and managing the still numerous Christian population, the Sasanians reversed their policy within a few years. They expelled the Jewish leadership, placing the city under the control of a Christian council. The Persian interlude, lasting approximately 15 years, ended as abruptly as it began. The Byzantine Emperor Heraclius launched a brilliant counteroffensive that penetrated deep into Persian territory, culminating in a decisive victory at the Battle of Nineveh in 627 CE. The subsequent collapse of Khosrow II's regime led to a peace treaty in 628, which stipulated the return of all conquered territories. In 630, Heraclius triumphantly entered Jerusalem and restored the true cross to the city, but he returned to a province that was demographically shattered, economically ruined, and militarily exhausted, leaving it profoundly vulnerable to the next wave of conquerors emerging from the Arabian Peninsula. The Byzantine restoration under Heraclius proved to be exceptionally brief, as the province's depleted state coincided with the explosive expansion of a new monotheistic power from the Arabian Peninsula. The political and religious unification achieved under the Prophet Muhammad and his immediate successors, the Rashidun caliphs, created a formidable and highly motivated military force. Initial Arab raids into southern Palestine began as early as 634 CE, testing the overstretched Byzantine defences. These early encounters culminated in the Battle of Ajnadain in central Palestine, where a Rashidun army under the command of Khalid ibn al-Walid decisively defeated a major Byzantine force, securing control over most of the countryside and demonstrating the tactical superiority of the Arab light cavalry and infantry coordination. This defeat forced the Byzantines to consolidate their remaining forces for a single decisive confrontation to reclaim the Levant. That confrontation occurred in August 636 CE along the banks of the Yarmouk River, a tributary of the Jordan. Emperor Heraclius had assembled a massive multi-ethnic imperial army, drawing troops from across the empire, including Armenians and allied Ghassanid Arab federates, under the command of Vahan and Theodore Tritherius. The Rashidun army, though significantly outnumbered, possessed superior mobility, logistical simplicity, and a unified command structure under the strategic genius of Khalid ibn al-Walid. The six-day battle was a tactical masterpiece. Khalid utilized his elite mobile cavalry reserve, the Mutaharik, to counter Byzantine charges and exploit weaknesses, turning the tide at several critical moments. The battle's climax was aided by a severe sandstorm that blew into the faces of the Byzantine soldiers, blinding them and disrupting their formations. The ensuing rout was catastrophic for the imperial army, which was effectively annihilated, permanently shattering Byzantine military power in Syria and Palestine. With the main Byzantine field army destroyed, the path was clear for the consolidation of Muslim rule. The Rashidun forces systematically captured the remaining fortified cities. The focus soon turned to Jerusalem, which was placed under siege in November 636 CE. The city, defended by its formidable walls and a small garrison, held out for several months, but its strategic position was hopeless. The city's leader, Patriarch Sophronius, recognizing the futility of further resistance, offered to surrender, but only to the caliph himself. In 637 CE, Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab travelled from Medina to personally accept the city's capitulation. The terms of the surrender were formalized in the Pact of Umar, al-Uda al-Umariyah, a foundational document that guaranteed the security of the Christian population, their churches, and their property, in exchange for the payment of the jizya, a poll tax levied on non-Muslim subjects. Upon entering the city, Umar famously declined to pray inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre to ensure it would not be converted into a mosque. He was then guided to the neglected Temple Mount, which he ordered cleared of debris, thereby consecrating it as a Muslim holy site, the Haram al-Sharif. This peaceful transfer of power marked the definitive end of 7 centuries of Roman and Byzantine rule, inaugurating a new era of Islamic administration. The establishment of the Umayyad Caliphate in 661 CE, with its capital shifted from the Arabian heartland to Damascus, fundamentally elevated the strategic and religious importance of Palestine. The region was formally organized as a military and administrative district, Jund Filastin, a designation that underscored its role as a frontier province and a key part of Bilad al-Sham, Greater Syria. The administrative center was initially established at Lud, before Caliph Suleiman ibn Abd al-Malik founded the new city of Ramla in the early 8th century as the provincial capital, the first major urban center built by the Arabs in the region. This act of city building signified a shift from temporary military encampment to permanent centralized Islamic governance. Umayyad rule was characterized by a policy of pragmatic administration, retaining much of the existing Byzantine bureaucratic machinery and personnel, while gradually introducing Arabic as the official language of government, a process that accelerated the Arabization of the local Aramaic and Greek-speaking populations. The most enduring legacy of this period was architectural, centered on Jerusalem's Haram al-Sharif. Caliph Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan commissioned the construction of the Dome of the Rock, completed around 691 CE. This monument was a profound political and religious statement. Built directly upon the foundation stone on the Temple Mount, its octagonal design and opulent mosaics were executed by artisans trained in the Byzantine tradition, yet its purpose was distinctly Islamic. The extensive Kufic inscriptions circling the interior are among the earliest surviving examples of Quranic text in an architectural context, explicitly proclaiming the tenets of Islam, particularly the oneness of God, in direct theological dialogue with the Christian doctrines of the Trinity and the divinity of Jesus. It was not a mosque for congregational prayer, but a shrine intended to consecrate the site and assert the permanence and supremacy of the new faith in a city revered by Judaism and Christianity. Shortly after, the Umayyads also constructed the Al-Aqsa Mosque at the southern end of the Haram al-Sharif, establishing the compound as the third holiest site in Islam, linked to the Prophet Muhammad's night journey, Isra and Miraj. Together, these structures transformed the sacred geography of Jerusalem. The process of Islamization throughout Palestine was gradual and not coerced. The majority Christian and smaller Jewish and Samaritan populations were granted the status of Ahl al-Dhimma, protected peoples, allowing them religious freedom in exchange for the jizya tax. Over generations, social, economic, and political incentives encouraged conversions, slowly altering the demographic composition of the province. The Umayyad era thus established the foundational administrative and religious frameworks of Islamic Palestine, integrating the region into the heart of their caliphate and leaving an indelible mark on its landscape and identity. The Abbasid Revolution of 750 CE, which violently overthrew the Umayyad dynasty, marked a fundamental reorientation of the Islamic Caliphate and profoundly altered the status of Palestine. The establishment of a new capital, the purpose-built city of Baghdad in 762 CE, shifted the empire's center of gravity eastward, away from the Syrian heartland, and towards Mesopotamian and Persian spheres of influence. This geographical and political move immediately relegated Palestine, once a region of prime strategic and religious focus for the Damascus-based Umayyads, to the status of a more remote and secondary province. The direct imperial patronage that had resulted in the construction of Ramla and the monumental works on the Haram al-Sharif largely ceased, replaced by a more distant and often neglectful administration. The once thriving provincial capital of Ramla began a slow decline as trade routes and imperial attention were redirected toward the new metropolis of Baghdad. Under Abbasid rule, Jund Philastin was governed from afar, and its internal affairs were frequently characterized by instability. The province became a theater for recurrent tribal conflicts, particularly between the northern Qays and southern Yemen factions of Arab tribes, whose rivalries often erupted into open warfare that the central government struggled to control effectively. Furthermore, Abbasid fiscal policies, which often involved heavier and more extractive taxation to fund the vast new empire, fueled resentment and sparked numerous local revolts. One of the most significant of these was the rebellion of Abu Harb al-Mubarak in the 840s, a messianic figure who rallied a large following of rural peasants against Abbasid authority, a movement that required a major military expedition from Baghdad to suppress. While the region's political importance waned, its religious significance endured, though it no longer attracted the same level of caliphal investment. The grand architectural projects of the Umayyads were not replicated. Instead, Abbasid engagement with Jerusalem's holy sites was largely limited to necessary repairs and restorations. following a severe earthquake in 749 CE that damaged the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Abbasid Caliph al-Mansur ordered its initial reconstruction, and later, Caliph al-Mahdi undertook further renovations in the 770s. Caliph al-Ma'mun also sponsored restoration work on the Dome of the Rock in the early 9th century. These acts were those of maintenance rather than innovation, reflecting the province's new status. For the majority of the Abbasid period, Palestine remained a provincial backwater, managed from a distance and valued more for its tax revenues and symbolic religious status than for its strategic position, a state of affairs that made it increasingly vulnerable to the fragmentation of caliphal power and the rise of autonomous regional dynasties. The waning of centralized Abbasid authority in the 10th century allowed for the rise of semi-independent dynasties across the Islamic world, with Palestine first falling under the control of the Egypt-based Ikhshidids. This period of regional autonomy was decisively ended in 969 CE, when the Fatimids, a powerful Ismaili Shia dynasty from North Africa, conquered Egypt and subsequently extended their dominion over Palestine and Syria. The establishment of their new capital at Cairo in 973 CE repositioned the center of a major imperial power in close proximity to Palestine, restoring a level of strategic importance to the region not seen since the Umayyad era. The Fatimids, claiming descent from the Prophet Muhammad's daughter Fatima, represented a direct ideological and political challenge to the Sunni Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad, and control over the holy sites in Jerusalem was central to legitimizing their rival claim to leadership of the Muslim world. Fatimid administration in Palestine was often precarious, marked by a constant struggle to assert control against multiple adversaries. Their rule was repeatedly challenged by the powerful Jarahid clan of the Bedouin Banu Tai tribe, who sought to carve out an autonomous state in the Palestinian interior and frequently allied with the Fatimids' external enemies. The province also faced incursions from the north by the Byzantine Empire, which saw the shift in power as an opportunity to reclaim territory, and from the east by the radical Shia Qarmatians, who briefly occupied Ramla and contested Fatimid authority throughout Syria. Despite this instability, the Fatimids generally continued the pragmatic policy of religious tolerance toward the dhimmi communities, and Christian and Jewish pilgrimage to Jerusalem continued, representing a vital source of revenue. This policy of coexistence was violently interrupted during the reign of the 6th Fatimid Caliph, Al-Hakim bi Amrallah, 996–1021. His rule became increasingly erratic and oppressive, culminating in a series of persecutory edicts against non-Muslims. In 1009, he ordered the complete demolition of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, an act of destruction that sent shockwaves throughout the Christian world. Al-Hakim's successors reverted to more tolerant policies, and permission was granted for the Byzantine Empire to finance the church's slow reconstruction. However, the Fatimid state itself was entering a period of terminal decline, plagued by internal factionalism and the growing power of military viziers. In the 1070s, this weakness was exploited by a new force, the Seljuk Turks, Sunni warriors from Central Asia who swept into Syria and Palestine, capturing Jerusalem from its Fatimid garrison and establishing a new, more militantly Sunni regime, fundamentally altering the political and religious landscape on the eve of the First Crusade. The fragmented political landscape of Palestine, contested between a weakened Fatimid Caliphate and various Seljuk successor states, set the stage for an unprecedented intervention from Western Europe. Responding to Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komnenos' appeal for military aid against the Seljuks, Pope Urban II, at the Council of Clermont in 1095, reframed the request into a call for an armed pilgrimage to liberate Jerusalem. This summons, fueled by reports of pilgrim harassment and the memory of the Holy Sepulchre's destruction decades earlier, mobilized a massive and diverse force. The ensuing First Crusade was not a unified army, but a collection of distinct military contingents led by powerful Frankish nobles, including Godfrey of Bouillon, Raymond of Toulouse, and Bohemond of Taranto. preceded by the disastrous and ill-disciplined People's Crusade, these professional armies embarked on a grueling overland march, capturing the Seljuk capital of Nicaea in 1097 and enduring a lengthy siege to take the strategic city of Antioch in 1098. Their campaign benefited significantly from the disunity among their Muslim adversaries. The Seljuk Empire was embroiled in succession struggles, and the Sunni Seljuks and Shia Fatimids were bitter rivals. In a crucial development, just as the Crusaders were advancing south, the Fatimids recaptured Jerusalem from the Seljuks in 1098, meaning the final confrontation for the city would be against its Egyptian garrison. By June 1099, the depleted but determined Crusader force arrived before the formidable walls of Jerusalem. They faced a well-defended city with limited immediate resources for a prolonged siege. The construction of siege towers, a critical component of their strategy, was only made possible by the timely arrival of Genoese ships at Jaffa, providing essential timber and skilled engineers. After a 5-week siege, on July 15, 1099, Crusader forces breached the northern walls, leading to the city's capture. The conquest was followed by a brutal and systematic massacre of the city's Muslim and Jewish inhabitants, an event recorded in both Christian and Muslim chronicles. In the immediate aftermath, a political structure had to be established. Raymond of Toulouse declined the offer of rule, and Godfrey of Bouillon was chosen as the first Frankish ruler, though he famously refused the title of king, instead adopting the designation Advocatus Sancti Sepulchri, Advocate of the Holy Sepulchre. Following his death a year later, his brother, Baldwin of Boulogne, accepted the crown, becoming Baldwin I and formally establishing the Kingdom of Jerusalem. This event marked the imposition of a European feudal monarchy onto the Levant, creating a new political entity that, alongside the other newly formed Crusader states of Edessa, Antioch and Tripoli, would fundamentally reconfigure the region's geopolitics for the next 2 centuries. The establishment of the Kingdom of Jerusalem and its northern counterparts initiated a unique political experiment, transplanting Western European feudal structures into the complex society of the Levant. This new ruling class, known collectively as the Franks, constituted a small military and administrative elite, governing a vastly larger and more diverse native population of Eastern Christians, Muslims, and Jews. The political framework of the Kingdom of Jerusalem was modelled on the feudal monarchies of Europe, with the king at its apex, but his authority was significantly circumscribed by the power of the landed nobility. The High Court of Jerusalem, an assembly of the kingdom's tenants-in-chief, served as the primary legislative and judicial body, and its legal code, the Assizes of Jerusalem, codified a system where the king was considered first among equals rather than an absolute ruler. This decentralized structure was a constant source of internal weakness, as powerful baronial families often pursued their own interests at the expense of unified state policy. To address the chronic shortage of manpower and the immense challenge of defending extensive borders, the Crusader states relied heavily on the emergence of the military orders. The Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller, religious orders of warrior monks, became the backbone of the kingdom's defense. Bound by vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, they answered directly to the Pope, giving them considerable autonomy from the secular lords. These orders accumulated vast wealth through donations from Europe, which they used to construct and garrison a network of formidable castles, such as Belvoir and the Crac des Chevaliers, which were often more advanced in their defensive technology than contemporary European fortifications. Their permanent military presence provided a professional standing army that was crucial for the kingdom's survival. Economically, the Crusader states were littoral entities, their prosperity dependent on control of the coastal cities like Acre, Tyre, and Jaffa. These ports became vital conduits for trade between the East and West, a commerce largely dominated by the maritime republics of Venice, Genoa, and Pisa, who were granted extensive commercial privileges in exchange for naval support. The agricultural hinterland was organized into fiefs, where Frankish lords oversaw estates worked by the local peasantry, who largely retained their own customs and legal systems for internal matters. While a degree of segregation was maintained, daily life necessitated a level of pragmatic interaction and cultural exchange. The Franks adopted local building techniques, food and hygiene practices, such as the use of public bathhouses. This period was not one of deep cultural fusion, but rather one of coexistence, a fragile arrangement maintained by a Frankish military elite, precariously positioned and perpetually dependent on support from Europe against the looming threat of a unified Muslim response. The fragile coexistence of the Crusader states depended entirely on the political disunity of their Muslim neighbours. This crucial advantage began to erode in the mid-12th century, with the rise of the Zengid dynasty in Syria and Mesopotamia. Imad al-Din Zengi, and later his son Nur al-Din, methodically consolidated power under the unifying ideology of jihad, a counter-crusade aimed at expelling the Franks. The fall of the Crusader county of Edessa to Zengi in 1144 was a major strategic blow, demonstrating the potential of a unified Muslim front and prompting the largely unsuccessful Second Crusade. It was in the service of Nur al-Din that a Kurdish officer, Salah al-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, known to the West as Saladin, first rose to prominence. Dispatched to Egypt in 1169, he was appointed vizier of the declining Fatimid Caliphate, and through a series of shrewd political maneuvers, he consolidated his personal control over the country's vast resources. In 1171, Saladin formally abolished the Shia Fatimid Caliphate, restoring Egypt to Sunni orthodoxy and aligning it with the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad, a move that greatly enhanced his legitimacy. Following Nur al-Din's death in 1174, Saladin used his Egyptian power base to systematically unify the Zengid territories in Syria, a process that took over a decade of warfare and diplomacy. By the mid-1180s, his Ayyubid Sultanate had encircled the Kingdom of Jerusalem, uniting the Muslim Levant under a single ruler for the first time since the Crusader conquest. This unification coincided with a period of severe internal crisis within the Frankish kingdom. The reign of the capable but leprous King Baldwin IV was marked by factional strife between a court party favouring diplomacy and a more aggressive baronial faction, led by figures such as the reckless Reynald of Châtillon and Guy of de Lusignan. Upon Baldwin's death and the subsequent death of his young nephew, Guy of Lusignan became king, empowering the militant faction. The catalyst for war came in 1187, when Reynald of Châtillon, in direct violation of a truce, attacked a wealthy Muslim caravan. This provocation gave Saladin the justification for a full-scale invasion. He strategically besieged the city of Tiberias, a possession of Raymond of Tripoli's wife, correctly predicting that King Guy would be goaded into marching the kingdom's entire field army to its relief. This decision, made against the advice of more experienced commanders, forced the Frankish army to traverse a hot, arid plateau without adequate water supplies. On July 4, 1187, near the Horns of Hattin, Saladin's forces trapped the exhausted and dehydrated Crusader army. Harassed by horse archers and suffering immensely from thirst, the Frankish infantry broke ranks, and the knights were overwhelmed. The battle was a catastrophic defeat. The bulk of the kingdom's military strength was annihilated, King Guy was captured, and the relic of the True Cross was lost. In the following months, the defenseless kingdom collapsed. Saladin swiftly captured city after city, culminating in the surrender of Jerusalem in October 1187, an event that would directly trigger the Third Crusade. The loss of Jerusalem prompted the Third Crusade, a massive military enterprise led by the most powerful monarchs of Western Europe: Philip II of France, Frederick Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire, and Richard I of England. Despite its scale, the campaign yielded limited results. Barbarossa drowned en route, and Philip returned to France after the successful but arduous siege of Acre in 1191. Richard I continued the campaign, achieving several tactical victories against Saladin but ultimately failing to recapture Jerusalem. The crusade concluded in 1192 with the Treaty of Jaffa, which left Jerusalem under Ayyubid control but secured a narrow coastal strip for the Franks and guaranteed unarmed Christian pilgrims access to the holy sites. This agreement established the basis for the rump state known as the Second Kingdom of Jerusalem, or the Kingdom of Acre, which would survive for another century, its existence largely confined to the littoral and heavily dependent on maritime trade controlled by Italian city-states. The subsequent major crusades were characterized by shifting strategies and repeated failures. The Fourth Crusade, infamously diverted in 1204, resulted in the sack of Constantinople, permanently damaging Byzantine-Latin relations and offering no relief to the beleaguered Kingdom of Acre. Recognizing that the seat of Ayyubid power was in Egypt, the Fifth Crusade, 1217-1221, targeted the Nile Delta, successfully capturing the port of Damietta. However, internal leadership disputes and a disastrous march on Cairo led to the army's defeat and surrender. A decade later, the Sixth Crusade, 1228-1229, saw Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II achieve a remarkable diplomatic success. Without a major battle, he negotiated the Treaty of Jaffa and Tel Adril, which restored Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and a corridor to the coast to Frankish rule. This bloodless victory was controversial, as Frederick had been excommunicated, and the city, remaining unfortified, was militarily untenable. This brief restoration ended in 1244, when Khwarezmian mercenaries, displaced by the Mongols and allied with the Ayyubid Sultan of Egypt, sacked Jerusalem and subsequently annihilated a combined Frankish-Syrian Ayyubid army at the Battle of Laforbi. This defeat was as decisive as Hattin, permanently ending Christian control of Jerusalem and crippling the military capacity of the local nobility. The final major crusades, led by Louis IX of France, continued the focus on Egypt, but also ended in failure, with the king himself being captured during the Seventh Crusade. The political landscape was once again transformed in 1250, when the Ayyubid dynasty in Egypt was overthrown by its elite Mamluk slave soldiers. The new Mamluk Sultanate, under implacable leaders like Baybars, adopted a systematic policy of eradicating the last vestiges of the Crusader presence, setting the stage for the final siege of Acre and the end of Frankish rule in the Levant. The political vacuum created by the decline of the Ayyubid Sultanate was filled by a new and formidable military power originating from within the Ayyubid army itself. The Mamluks, a military caste of slave soldiers predominantly of Kipchak Turkic and Circassian origin, seized control of Egypt in 1250, establishing a unique and durable state. Their system of governance was non-hereditary. Power was theoretically transferred not through bloodline, but through the ability of the most powerful Mamluk emir to eliminate rivals and secure the loyalty of the military elite. This internal system of meritocratic, albeit violent, succession produced a series of highly capable and ruthless sultans who would dominate the Levant for over 2.5 centuries. The early Mamluk Sultanate immediately faced an existential threat that dwarfed that of the weakened Crusader states. The Mongol Empire, having sacked Baghdad in 1258 and extinguished the Abbasid Caliphate, continued its inexorable advance westward, sweeping through Syria. In 1260, the fate of the region was decided in Palestine. A Mongol army under the general Kitbuka confronted the Mamluk forces led by Sultan Qutuz and his commander Baybars at Ain Jalut, the Spring of Goliath. The Mamluks, employing tactics that combined the discipline of settled armies with the mobile archery of their own steppe traditions, inflicted a decisive defeat upon the Mongols. This battle was a pivotal moment in world history. marking the first significant check on Mongol expansion and establishing the Mamluks as the preeminent military power in the Islamic world. In the immediate aftermath, Baybars assassinated Qutuz and seized the Sultanate, initiating a reign defined by relentless military campaigning and administrative consolidation. He recognized that the continued presence of the Frankish states, however weak, posed a strategic vulnerability, potentially providing a beachhead for a future Mongol-Christian alliance. Sultan Baybars and his successors, such as Kalawun and Al-Ashraf Khalil, therefore embarked on a systematic and methodical war of attrition to eradicate the last vestiges of Crusader rule. This was not a campaign of mere conquest, but of permanent removal. The Mamluk strategy involved besieging and capturing the remaining Frankish castles and coastal cities one by one. Upon capture, fortresses like Saft, Arsuf, and the formidable Crac des Chevaliers were not re-garrisoned, but were methodically dismantled to render them useless to any future invading force. This policy culminated in 1291 with the siege and capture of Acre, the last major Crusader stronghold. The fall of Acre effectively ended the 2-century-long Frankish presence in the Levant. Under Mamluk rule, Palestine was integrated into a highly centralized state, administered from Cairo, with Jerusalem, Gaza, and Safed serving as capitals of its 3 administrative provinces, or mamlakas. With the final expulsion of the Franks in 1291, Mamluk authority over Palestine was uncontested. The region, no longer a volatile frontier, was fully integrated into the Sultanate's centralized administrative framework governed from Cairo. The territory was divided into 3 primary provinces, or mamlakas, each administered by a governor, or naib, appointed directly by the Sultan. The Mamlaka of Gaza controlled the southern coast, Safed commanded the Galilee, and Jerusalem, though smaller, held immense religious prestige. The economic and military backbone of the state was the Iqtar system, a method of assigning non-hereditary land revenue grants to Mamluk emirs and their soldiers in lieu of salary. While this secured military loyalty, the non-hereditary nature of the grants discouraged long-term investment in agricultural infrastructure, often leading to short-term exploitation of the land by emirs, who sought to maximize profit during their temporary tenure. A highly efficient postal service, the Barid, which utilized a network of relay stations, connected Palestine to the imperial centers of Cairo and Damascus, facilitating rapid communication and state control. The Mamluk era, particularly the 14th century, witnessed a remarkable architectural efflorescence, especially within Jerusalem. Unable to establish hereditary dynasties, powerful emirs channeled their wealth into pious endowments, or waqf, creating lasting monuments that served as testaments to their power and piety. This resulted in the construction of numerous madrasas, khanqahs, turbas, and sables, which fundamentally reshaped the city's Islamic architectural character. Grand projects like the Souk al-Katanin, the Cotton Merchants' Market, and the Tankidziyah Madrasa were commissioned, displaying the distinctive Mamluk architectural style characterized by ablaq masonry, muqarnas detailing, and intricate geometric patterns. This patronage transformed Jerusalem into a major center for Sunni Islamic scholarship. Economically, the region produced cotton, olive oil, and soap, but its overall prosperity began a slow decline. The Mamluk policy of deliberately leaving the coast undefended and its ports in ruin to prevent another crusade stifled maritime commerce, shifting trade inland. The Sultanate's eventual decline was precipitated by a confluence of disasters. The Black Death, which swept through the region from 1347 to 1351, had a catastrophic demographic impact, wiping out a significant portion of the population and crippling the agricultural economy. Recurrent plagues continued to destabilize the region for the next century. This was compounded by relentless internal power struggles in Cairo, as rival Mamluk factions vied for the Sultanate, leading to political instability that echoed through the provinces. The discovery of a sea route to India by the Portuguese at the end of the 15th century rerouted the lucrative spice trade, depriving the Mamluk state of vital transit revenues. Finally, the Mamluks' conservative military establishment was slow to adopt gunpowder weapons, a technological shift embraced by the ascendant Ottoman Empire, which would ultimately prove to be their undoing. By the early 16th century, the confluence of factors weakening the Mamluk Sultanate coincided with the consolidation of a formidable new power in Anatolia. The Ottoman Empire, having expanded across Anatolia and the Balkans, had evolved into a highly centralized state with a military that was technologically superior to its rivals. The critical distinction lay in the Ottoman embrace of gunpowder warfare. While the Mamluks continued to prize the traditional martial skills of cavalry archery and lance charges, viewing firearms as dishonorable and beneath a true warrior, the Ottomans had integrated artillery and muskets into the core of their army. Their elite Janissary infantry corps was systematically equipped with firearms, and they had developed a sophisticated siege and field artillery train, creating a combined arms military machine that the Mamluks were ill-prepared to confront. The ascent of the formidable Sultan Selim I in 1512 marked a shift to a more aggressive expansionist policy. The primary catalyst for conflict was the rise of the Safavid Empire in Persia, which presented a Shia challenge to Ottoman Sunni dominance. After decisively defeating the Safavids at the Battle of Chaldiran in 1514, Selim I grew suspicious of the Mamluks, whom he suspected of colluding with the Persians. Using the Mamluk relationship with a vassal state as a pretext, Selim marched his technologically advanced army south. The Mamluk Sultan, the elderly Al-Ashraf Khansa al-Ghauri, mobilized his forces to meet the threat, assembling a traditional Mamluk army reliant on the elan of its heavy cavalry. The two empires met on August 24, 1516, at Majd-Dabik, a plain north of Aleppo in Syria. The ensuing battle was not a contest of equals, but a demonstration of a paradigm shift in military technology. The Mamluk cavalry, in a display of immense courage, charged the Ottoman lines as they had done successfully for centuries. They were met not with arrows and spears, but with a devastating volley of cannon and musket fire. The Ottoman artillery tore through the Mamluk formations, while the disciplined fire of the Janissaries decimated the knights and their horses before they could make contact. The traditional Mamluk tactic was rendered obsolete in a single morning. The Mamluk army, considered invincible for nearly 3 centuries, was shattered. Sultan al-Ghori died on the battlefield, and his forces disintegrated. The Battle of Majd-Dabik was one of the most consequential in the region's history. It completely broke Mamluk power in Syria and opened the path for the Ottomans to advance unopposed. In the months that followed, Selim's forces swept through Palestine and continued into Egypt, ending the Mamluk Sultanate entirely. This swift conquest inaugurated a new 400-year era of Ottoman sovereignty over Palestine. Following the swift military victory at Majd-Dabik and the subsequent collapse of the Mamluk Sultanate, the Ottoman Empire absorbed Palestine into its vast and highly organized administrative system. The transition was less a violent restructuring and more a systematic superimposition of Ottoman bureaucracy onto existing local structures. Initially, the territory was not administered as a single, unified entity, but was incorporated as a series of districts within the larger eyalet or province of Damascus. This administrative arrangement reflected the Ottoman strategic view of the region as an integral part of Greater Syria. The core of local governance was the Sanjak, or district, each governed by a Sanjak Bey, appointed from Istanbul. The lands of Palestine were primarily divided among the Sanjaks of Jerusalem, Gaza, and Nablus, with the northern areas falling under the jurisdiction of the Sanjak of Safed. This structure allowed for direct imperial oversight, while utilizing established urban centers for regional administration. The economic foundation of the early Ottoman state was the Taimar system, a land tenure framework that replaced the Mamluk Iqta. Under this system, agricultural lands were registered in detailed tax surveys, or tahrir defterleri, and their revenues were assigned to Ottoman cavalrymen, known as sipahiz, in exchange for military service. This non-hereditary grant ensured the loyalty of the provincial army and its readiness for campaigns. while also providing a mechanism for tax collection. The Sipahi was responsible for maintaining order in his timar, but was overseen by the Sanjak Bey and the Qadi, an Islamic judge who administered Sharia law and handled legal matters for the local population. This division of power between military, administrative, and judicial authorities was a hallmark of Ottoman governance, designed to prevent any single official from accumulating excessive regional power. For the majority of the population, life continued under a new imperial master, but with familiar local dynamics. The Ottomans often co-opted local notable families, granting them a degree of autonomy in village and town affairs in exchange for their cooperation in maintaining order and facilitating tax collection. The empire's primary concerns were security, particularly for the Hajj pilgrimage route to Mecca which passed through the region, and the steady flow of tax revenue to the imperial treasury in Istanbul. The initial period of Ottoman rule was characterized by this pragmatic integration, establishing a framework of stability and centralized control. While Selim I's conquest had been a military affair, it was the administrative genius of his successor, Suleiman the Magnificent, that would leave a more lasting and visible architectural imprint on the land, particularly in Jerusalem. While the early Ottoman system established a robust framework for centralized control, the empire's vastness and frequent preoccupation with its European and Persian frontiers created periodic power vacuums in its provinces. During these intervals of weakened imperial oversight, ambitious local leaders could emerge, manipulating the Ottoman administrative system to carve out autonomous statelets. In the 17th and 18th centuries, two such figures rose to dominate northern Palestine and the Lebanese coast. The first was Fakhr al-Din al-Mani II, a Druze emir who, from his base in the Shuf Mountains, extended his authority south into Galilee in the early 1600s. Officially an Ottoman appointee and tax farmer, or multazim, he used his position to build a personal army and a centralized administration that superseded imperial structures. He promoted a policy of religious tolerance to stimulate economic activity, encouraging Maronite and European Christian merchants to settle and trade. He forged direct diplomatic and commercial ties with Italian states, particularly the Grand Duchy of Tuscany, exporting silk and other local goods in exchange for modern weaponry. This assertion of economic and political independence, coupled with his foreign alliances, was an intolerable challenge to the Sublime Porte. In 1633, the Ottomans dispatched a punitive expedition, eventually capturing Fakhr al-Din, who was taken to Istanbul and executed in 1635, leading to the collapse of his autonomous emirate. A century later, a similar opportunity arose during a period of Ottoman military distraction. Daher al-Umar, a local Bedouin strongman from the Zaydani clan, began consolidating power in the Galilee around the 1730s. Initially a tax collector, he skillfully expanded his control, eventually capturing the port city of Acre in 1746 and making it his fortified capital. His rule was characterized by remarkable economic development. He monopolized the export of cotton and grain to European markets, generating immense wealth which he used to fund his private army and extensive building projects. He created a secure and stable domain, suppressing banditry and encouraging the settlement of minorities, famously inviting Jewish families to resettle Tiberias to revive its economy. For several decades, Daher al-Umar ruled as a de facto sovereign, paying little heed to the governors in Damascus or Saida. His defiance culminated in an alliance with Ali Bey al-Kabir of Egypt and the Russian fleet during the Russo-Turkish War. Once the war with Russia concluded, however, the Ottoman state turned its full attention to this internal rebellion. In 1775, an imperial fleet and army besieged Acre, where Daher was ultimately defeated and killed, bringing his independent rule to an end. The close of the 18th century witnessed a dramatic, albeit brief, intrusion of European geopolitical conflict directly into Palestine. In 1798, General Napoleon Bonaparte of revolutionary France launched an invasion of Egypt, with the strategic aim of disrupting Great Britain's land route to India and establishing a French colonial presence in the east. After securing Lower Egypt, Napoleon learned that the Ottoman Empire was preparing two armies to retake the province. To preempt this, in February 1799, he marched a force of 13 veteran soldiers north into Palestine, intending to destroy the Ottoman army assembling in Syria. The French advance was swift, capturing the coastal towns of El Arish and Gaza before laying siege to Jaffa. The city fell after a brief but brutal assault, which was followed by a notorious massacre where French troops executed several thousand captured Ottoman soldiers on the beach, an act of calculated terror intended to discourage further resistance. From Jaffa, Napoleon marched on Acre, the heavily fortified port city that had served as the capital for both Daher al-Umar and his successor, the notoriously ruthless Ottoman governor of Bosnian origin, Ahmad Pasha al-Jazar. Al-Jazar was determined to resist, but the city's fate was ultimately decided at sea. A British Royal Navy squadron, commanded by Commodore Sir Sidney Smith, intercepted and captured the French flotilla carrying Napoleon's heavy siege artillery from Egypt. This loss proved catastrophic for the French campaign. Without his heavy cannons, Napoleon was forced to conduct the siege with only his lighter field artillery, which was largely ineffective against Acre's formidable modernized walls. The siege began in March 1799 and lasted for 2 months. The French army, despite its experience and high morale, launched a series of costly frontal assaults that were repulsed with heavy losses. The defence was expertly managed by Al-Jazar and bolstered by critical British support. Sir Sidney Smith's ships provided naval gunfire support, landed Royal Marines to reinforce the garrison, and resupplied the city with food and ammunition. A French royalist engineer in British service, Antoine de Philippot, used his expertise to counter French siege tactics. Plagued by the outbreak of disease in his camp and unable to breach the city's defences, Napoleon was forced to admit his first major personal defeat. In May 1799, he lifted the siege and began a grueling retreat to Egypt, his army ravaged by combat losses and the plague. The failed siege of Acre effectively destroyed Napoleon's eastern ambitions, demonstrating the critical importance of sea power and marking a turning point that foreshadowed the increasing European military involvement in the region. Following Napoleon's withdrawal, a new and transformative power emerged from within the Ottoman Empire itself. Muhammad Ali, the ambitious Ottoman governor of Egypt, had spent decades building a modern, European-style army and a centralized bureaucracy. In 1831, using a dispute with the governor of Acre as a pretext, he dispatched his son, Ibrahim Pasha, to conquer Ottoman Syria. The Egyptian army, trained by French officers and equipped with modern artillery, swept through Palestine, succeeding where Napoleon had failed by capturing the formidable fortress of Acre after a 6-month siege. For the next decade, the region would be subjected to a radical and disruptive period of direct Egyptian administration. Ibrahim Pasha's rule was not a simple change of imperial masters. It was a forceful attempt to impose a modern, centralized state apparatus onto a society accustomed to decentralized Ottoman governance. The reforms were immediate and far-reaching. The Egyptian administration sought to break the power of entrenched local notable families and Bedouin sheikhs who had long acted as semi-autonomous intermediaries. A system of direct taxation was implemented, replacing the often corrupt tax farming system and increasing the fiscal burden on the peasantry. For the first time, the government introduced regular military conscription, the Tanid, which forcibly drafted peasants into the Egyptian army, removing them from their lands and families. This policy, along with a systematic campaign to disarm the local population, was met with widespread and violent resistance. In 1834, a major peasant revolt erupted across the highlands of Nablus, Jerusalem, and Hebron, uniting villagers and some urban notables against the policies of conscription and taxation. The rebellion was so widespread that Muhammad Ali himself had to travel from Egypt with reinforcements to brutally suppress it, leaving thousands dead and villages destroyed. The Egyptian administration also introduced changes that altered the traditional social hierarchy, establishing a greater degree of legal equality between Muslims and non-Muslims. Christian and Jewish communities were granted new rights, including the ability to serve on local administrative councils, a significant departure from their previous dhimmi status under more traditional Islamic law. This period of intense, centralizing reform came to an end not by an Ottoman reconquest, but by European intervention. Great Britain, viewing Muhammad Ali's expanding empire as a threat to the stability of the Ottoman state and the regional balance of power, led a coalition of European powers. In 1840, a British, Austrian, and Ottoman naval and military campaign forced Ibrahim Pasha to withdraw from Syria and Palestine. The decade of Egyptian rule, though brief, had irrevocably shattered old social and political structures, introducing the region to direct state control and demonstrating its growing importance in European geopolitics. The restoration of direct Ottoman rule in 1840 did not signify a return to the old ways. Instead, it marked the beginning of a new era of profound transformation known as the Tanzimat. Spurred by military defeats and the internal challenge posed by Muhammad Ali, the Sublime Porte initiated a series of empire-wide modernizing reforms designed to centralize the state, rationalize its bureaucracy, and strengthen it against external pressures. In Palestine, these top-down reforms fundamentally reshaped the relationship between the state, the land, and the population, while simultaneously deepening European involvement in the region's affairs. A key instrument of this new policy was the Ottoman Land Code of 1858. Officially intended to regularize land tenure and increase tax efficiency, the law required all agricultural land to be registered in the name of its owner. This had disastrous, unintended consequences for the fellahin, or peasant farmers. Many avoided registration, fearing it would lead to increased taxation and, more critically, to easier identification for military conscription. Others, cultivating communal village lands, lacked the concept of private title. This legal vacuum was exploited by powerful urban notable families and foreign investors, who registered vast tracts of land in their own names, legally dispossessing the peasants who had worked the land for generations and transforming them into tenant farmers. This period also witnessed an unprecedented expansion of European influence, facilitated by the Ottoman system of capitulations, which granted foreign powers legal and economic privileges. European states established powerful consulates, particularly in Jerusalem, which began to function as extraterritorial entities, extending their legal protection not only to their own citizens, but also to local non-Muslim communities. This created a network of foreign protégés who were largely immune from Ottoman law. Concurrent with this political penetration was a surge in religious and archaeological activity. European Christian missionaries established schools, printing presses, and hospitals, introducing Western education and medicine, but also heightening sectarian awareness. At the same time, institutions like the British Palestine Exploration Fund began systematically mapping the region, defining it through the lens of biblical history. This growing European presence was also economic, with foreign merchants dominating the lucrative export trade, particularly in Jaffa oranges. The construction of the first carriage road from Jaffa to Jerusalem in the 1860s, a project driven by both commercial and pilgrim interests, symbolized this new era. The Tanzimat reforms, intended to revitalize Ottoman authority, ironically created the very conditions that weakened it, disrupting traditional society and embedding foreign influence deep within the fabric of Palestine. The final decades of the 19th century saw the seeds of modern nationalism, a concept imported from Europe, begin to germinate in Palestine's changing social landscape. Among the Arabic-speaking population, a nascent sense of distinct identity started to form, part of a wider cultural renaissance in the Levant known as the Nahda, or Arab Awakening. Centered initially in Beirut and Damascus, this intellectual movement emphasized the revitalization of the Arabic language and a shared cultural heritage as a basis for political consciousness. In Palestine, this was reflected in the growth of a local press and the increasing political engagement of urban notable families, who used newspapers like Al-Kamil in Haifa and later Philistin in Jaffa to articulate a local and pan-Arab identity. This early Arab nationalism was not initially a mass separatist movement, but an elite-driven response to Ottoman centralization and growing foreign encroachment. It sought greater autonomy and recognition for Arabs within a reformed Ottoman Empire, resisting both Turkish dominance and European colonial ambitions. Simultaneously, a profoundly different nationalist movement, born from the pressures of European anti-Semitism, began to focus on Palestine. Political Zionism emerged as a modern European ideology, arguing that the Jewish people constituted a nation that required a territorial state to normalize its existence and escape persecution. Early Zionist thinkers like Leon Pinsker articulated this in tracts such as Auto-Emancipation, calling for a national home. This ideology translated into practical action with the first Aliyah, a wave of Jewish immigration primarily from Russia and Eastern Europe between 1882 and 1903. These early pioneers, organized under the Hovevei Zion, Lovers of Zion movement, were largely secular idealists who aimed to create a new Jewish society through agricultural labor. With significant financial backing from European philanthropists like Baron Edmund de Rothschild, they established the first Jewish agricultural colonies, such as Rishon LeZion, Zikron Yaakov, and Petah Tikva. The arrival of these settlers introduced a new dynamic. Land for these colonies was often purchased in large tracts from absentee landlords, including the Sursok family of Beirut and local notable families who had acquired title under the 1858 Land Code. The subsequent eviction of the Arab tenant farmers who had cultivated these lands for generations created the first localized points of direct conflict. These disputes were primarily economic, revolving around land and resources, but they contained the core of the future national struggle. By the turn of the century, two distinct nationalist movements, born from entirely different historical experiences and holding competing aspirations for the same territory, had established a tangible presence in Palestine, setting the stage for the escalating conflicts of the 20th century. The outbreak of the First World War in 1914 and the Ottoman Empire's subsequent entry on the side of the Central Powers transformed Palestine from a relatively quiet province into a militarized frontier of immense strategic importance. Positioned adjacent to British-controlled Egypt and the vital Suez Canal, the region became the staging ground for the Ottoman Fourth Army, under the command of Jamal Pasha. The initial Ottoman strategy focused on striking at Britain's imperial lifeline, culminating in two ambitious but ultimately failed offensives across the Sinai Peninsula against the Canal in 1915 and 1916. These defeats prompted a strategic reversal, as the British Egyptian Expeditionary Force, or EEF, began a slow, methodical counter-advance eastward. This was a campaign dictated by logistics, as British engineers constructed a railway line and a water pipeline across the desert, inching their way toward the heavily fortified Ottoman defensive line, stretching from Gaza to Beersheba. The war's impact on the civilian population was catastrophic, marked by forced conscription, the Seferberlik, which drained villages of their manpower, and the systematic requisitioning of crops and livestock, leading to widespread famine, exacerbated by a devastating locust plague in 1915. The British advance ground to a halt in early 1917, suffering two costly defeats in frontal assaults on the entrenched Ottoman positions at the First and Second Battles of Gaza. The stalemate was broken only after a change in command, with the arrival of General Edmund Allenby, who reorganized the EEF and planned a new offensive. On October 31, 1917, He executed a brilliant flanking maneuver, beginning with the Battle of Beersheba, where a surprise dawn attack culminated in a now legendary cavalry charge by the Australian light horse that secured the town's crucial wells. This victory unhinged the entire Ottoman defensive line, forcing a general retreat. The EEF pushed north, capturing Jaffa, and, on December 9th, 1917, the Ottoman authorities surrendered Jerusalem. In a carefully staged display, Allenby entered the ancient city on foot, a deliberate gesture to contrast with the perceived arrogance of previous conquerors. After a pause in operations while troops were diverted to the Western Front, Allenby launched his final offensive in September 1918. The Battle of Megiddo, a masterfully executed encirclement, shattered the remaining Ottoman armies in Palestine. The subsequent advance was swift, leading to the capture of Damascus and Aleppo. On October 30th, 1918, the Ottoman Empire signed the Armistice of Mudros, ending hostilities. 4 centuries of Ottoman sovereignty over Palestine had come to a definitive end, leaving the region's future to be determined by the victorious Allied powers. While the Sinai and Palestine campaign was redrawing the military map, a series of secret diplomatic maneuvers and public declarations by Great Britain were creating a political quagmire that would define the region's future. Long before the final Ottoman defeat, the Allied powers had begun to partition the empire's territories in anticipation of victory. The first of these arrangements was the 1916 Sykes-Picot Agreement, a secret convention between Britain and France, with the assent of Russia, to divide the Ottoman Arab provinces into spheres of influence. Negotiated by diplomats Mark Sykes and François-Georges Picot, the agreement was a work of pure imperial realpolitik, allocating control of Syria and Lebanon to France and Mesopotamia, modern Iraq, and Transjordan to Britain. Due to its unique religious significance and the competing interests of the great powers, Palestine was designated for a special status, international administration, a compromise that satisfied neither side completely but kept the territory out of the exclusive hands of a rival. This secret plan for colonial partition stood in direct contradiction to another set of British wartime commitments. Between 1915 and 1916, Sir Henry McMahon, the British High Commissioner in Egypt, engaged in a correspondence with Hussein bin Ali, the Sharif of Mecca. In these letters, Britain promised to recognize and support Arab independence, in exchange for the Sharif launching an Arab revolt against the Ottoman Turks, a crucial diversion for the Allied war effort. The geographical extent of the proposed Arab state was ambiguously defined. Britain would later claim that Palestine was excluded from the pledge, citing French interests and the presence of non-Arab populations. Arab leaders, however, understood the promise to include Palestine, viewing the correspondence as a binding commitment to their sovereignty. A third, and equally incompatible, promise was made public on November 1917, just as Allenby's forces were advancing from Beersheba. The Balfour Declaration, a formal statement from British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour to Lord Rothschild, a leader of the British Jewish community, fundamentally altered the political equation. The declaration stated that the British government viewed with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. British motivations were complex, driven by a strategic desire to secure a pro-British entity near the Suez Canal and a belief that gaining the support of world Jewry could influence the war effort in America and Russia. The declaration contained a critical and inherently contradictory proviso that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. As the war concluded, the Ottoman administration was gone, but in its place stood 3 conflicting British promises: an international zone, an independent Arab state, and a Jewish national home, setting the stage for an inevitable and protracted conflict. With the end of the war and the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, the military occupation of Palestine gave way to a formal international legal framework designed by the victorious Allied powers. The conflicting wartime promises were reconciled, not by negotiation, but by the unilateral imposition of a new political entity. At the San Remo Conference in April 1920, the Allied Supreme Council formally assigned the mandate for Palestine to Great Britain, explicitly incorporating the text of the Balfour Declaration into its terms. This decision was later ratified by the Council of the League of Nations in July 1922, and the mandate officially came into effect in September 1923. The foundational document was inherently contradictory, charging Britain with facilitating the establishment of a Jewish national home, while simultaneously ensuring that the rights and position of the Arab majority were not prejudiced. This dual obligation would prove to be the central, unresolvable challenge of the next 3 decades, as the administration attempted to govern a territory for which 2 national groups held mutually exclusive aspirations. The British replaced their military government with a civil administration headed by a High Commissioner, the first of whom was Sir Herbert Samuel, a prominent British Jewish politician. The Mandate government established a centralised bureaucracy based on the British colonial model, creating departments for finance, law, public works, and security. It introduced a new legal system based on Ottoman precedent, modified by British common law, and issued its own currency, the Palestine pound. A key feature of Mandate policy was the organisation of the population along communal lines. The Jewish community, the Yishuv, was permitted to establish its own autonomous political institutions, including an elected assembly, the Asafat Hanavarim, and a national executive, the Vard Leumi. The Jewish Agency for Palestine was officially recognized as a public body to advise the Mandate administration on matters affecting the Jewish national home, effectively becoming a quasi-government responsible for immigration, settlement, and education. The Arab population, viewing the Mandate and its Zionist premise as a betrayal of wartime promises of independence, largely rejected the proposed political structures. British attempts to create a legislative council with representation from both communities failed when Arab leaders refused to participate, unwilling to legitimize an administration whose core purpose they opposed. In place of official bodies, Palestinian Arab political life was organized through the Arab Executive, and later the Arab Higher Committee, led by figures like Hajj Amin al-Husseini, the Mufti of Jerusalem. The Mandate administration proceeded to implement its core policies, regulating Jewish immigration through a system of certificates and overseeing land transfers, both of which became primary sources of intense political conflict. By structuring its administration around 2 distinct and unequal national communities, the British Mandate did not resolve the conflict but institutionalized it, creating parallel societies that would compete for control of the same land. The institutional framework of the British Mandate directly fueled the escalating conflict of the interwar years, primarily through its policies on Jewish immigration and land acquisition. The 1920s witnessed sporadic but increasingly severe outbreaks of violence, including the Nebi Musa riots in Jerusalem in 1920 and the Jaffa riots of 1921, which were early manifestations of Arab opposition to the Mandate's core objectives. A more widespread and violent series of disturbances erupted in 1929, originating from a dispute over access and religious articles at the Western Wall in Jerusalem, quickly spreading across the country and resulting in significant casualties, most notably in Hebron and Safad. These events demonstrated a pattern of growing communal friction, rooted in demographic and economic anxieties. The Fourth Aliyah, 1924-1929, brought a substantial number of middle-class Polish Jews, while the Fifth Aliyah, 1929-1939, saw a dramatic surge in immigration, largely driven by the rise of Nazism in Germany. This rapid demographic shift intensified Palestinian Arab fears of dispossession and political marginalization. Economically, land purchases by Zionist institutions like the Jewish National Fund led to the displacement of Arab tenant farmers, the fellahin, who had cultivated the land for generations but held no formal title. The sale of large tracts by absentee landlords created a growing class of landless, impoverished peasants, further radicalizing the Arab population. In April 1936, these simmering tensions finally boiled over into a full-scale uprising, known as the Arab Revolt or the Great Revolt. The revolt began with a spontaneous general strike, organized by local national committees, and soon coordinated by the newly formed Arab Higher Committee. The strike, which lasted for 6 months, was intended to paralyze the Mandate administration and force a change in British policy. When the strike failed to achieve its political aims, the revolt entered a second, more violent phase. From 1937 to 1939, a widespread rural insurgency took hold, characterized by guerrilla attacks on British military patrols, infrastructure such as oil pipelines and railways, and Jewish settlements. Rebel bands, often led by local commanders, gained effective control over large areas of the countryside. The British responded with a massive counterinsurgency campaign, eventually deploying over 20 troops to Palestine. They implemented harsh emergency measures, including collective punishment, mass detentions, and house demolitions, and armed Jewish settlement police, known as Notrim, to assist in security operations. By 1939, the revolt was brutally suppressed. Its leadership was killed, exiled, or imprisoned, and Palestinian Arab society was left politically and militarily shattered. However, the scale of the uprising forced London to fundamentally reconsider its position, leading directly to a dramatic shift in policy. The dramatic policy shift that concluded the Arab Revolt materialized in the MacDonald White Paper of May 1939. With another world war looming, Britain prioritized imperial stability over its Zionist commitments. The new policy severely restricted Jewish immigration to a total of 75 over the next 5 years, after which any further immigration would require Arab consent. It also placed stringent restrictions on Jewish land purchases. For the Yishuv, this was a catastrophic betrayal of the Balfour Declaration, coming at the moment European Jewry faced its greatest peril. For Palestinian Arabs, it was too little, too late, as they demanded an immediate end to immigration and a clear path to independence. The outbreak of World War II temporarily froze the local conflict. Palestine became a vital strategic garrison and supply depot for the British war effort in the Middle East. The Yishuv, under the leadership of David Ben-Gurion, adopted a pragmatic policy of fighting the war as if there were no white paper, and fighting the white paper as if there were no war. Over 30 Jewish men and women enlisted in the British Armed Forces, culminating in the formation of the Jewish Brigade in 1944, gaining invaluable military training and combat experience. The Palestinian Arab leadership, decimated by the revolt, was unable to present a united front. The exiled Mufti, Haj Amin al-Husseini, spent the war in Axis territory, broadcasting anti-Allied propaganda. The end of the war in 1945 and the full revelation of the Holocaust transformed the political landscape. The demand for a refuge for Jewish displaced persons became an urgent international issue, generating immense pressure on Britain to rescind the White Paper and open Palestine's gates. Britain, exhausted by war and economically crippled, found itself unable to enforce its restrictive immigration policy against a tide of illegal immigration, known as the Aliyah Bet, organized by the Haganah. The Yishuv's resistance to British rule escalated dramatically. While the Haganah focused on sabotage against British anti-immigration infrastructure, more radical underground groups, the Irgun and Lehi, launched a campaign of attacks against British military and administrative targets. This culminated in the July 1946 bombing of the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, which housed the British Military Command and the Mandate Secretariat, resulting in 91 deaths and marking a point of no return. Caught between escalating Jewish insurgency, intransigent Arab opposition, and immense international pressure, particularly from the United States, the British government concluded that the mandate was untenable. In February 1947, Foreign Secretary Ernest Bevin announced Britain's intention to terminate its mandate and hand the entire question of Palestine's future to the newly formed United Nations. The United Nations created the Special Committee on Palestine, UNSCOP, to investigate and propose a solution. In November 1947, the UN General Assembly voted to adopt Resolution 181, the Partition Plan for Palestine. It called for the termination of the British mandate and the division of the territory into two independent states, one Arab and one Jewish, with an international special regime, a corpus separatum, for the city of Jerusalem. The Jewish state was allocated approximately 56% of the land, while the Arab state was to receive 43%, though a significant Arab minority would reside within the proposed Jewish state's borders. The Jewish agency, representing the Yishuv, accepted the plan as a basis for statehood. The Arab Higher Committee and the surrounding Arab states rejected it outright, viewing it as a violation of the principle of national self-determination for the Arab majority. As the British began their withdrawal, the simmering conflict erupted into a full-scale civil war. From December 1947 to May 1948, Jewish and Arab militias battled for control of territory, strategic positions, and the roads connecting major population centres. Initially on the defensive, the Haganah launched Plan Dalet, Plan D, in April 1948, a strategic offensive to secure the areas allotted to the Jewish state under the UN plan and establish contiguous control. This phase saw the capture of key cities like Tiberias, Haifa, and Jaffa, and was marked by events such as the massacre at the village of Deir Yassin by Irgun and Lehi forces, which accelerated a growing exodus of the Palestinian Arab population. On May 14, 1948, as the last British forces departed, David Ben-Gurion declared the establishment of the State of Israel. The following day, the conflict entered its second phase as the armies of Egypt, Transjordan, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon invaded. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War had begun. The newly formed Israel Defense Forces, IDF, incorporating the Haganah and other paramilitary groups, faced a multi-front invasion. Despite initial Arab Legion successes in capturing the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem's Old City, the Israeli forces, bolstered by arms shipments from Czechoslovakia, managed to halt the advances and launch successful counter-offensives. By the time fighting ended in 1949, Israel controlled 78% of mandatory Palestine, substantially more than the UN plan had allocated. For the Palestinians, the war was the Nakba, or catastrophe. Over 700 Palestinian Arabs, more than half the Arab population, fled or were expelled from their homes in the territory that became Israel. Hundreds of their villages were depopulated and subsequently destroyed. The war concluded not with peace treaties, but with a series of armistice agreements between Israel and its neighbours, which established the de facto borders known as the Green Line, leaving the Palestinian refugee problem unresolved and setting the stage for decades of future conflict. The 1949 armistice agreements did not create a final peace, but instead solidified a new geopolitical reality. The territory of mandatory Palestine was now fractured. The new state of Israel existed within the armistice lines, later known as the Green Line. The West Bank, including East Jerusalem, was formally annexed by the Hashemite Kingdom of Transjordan, creating modern-day Jordan, while the Gaza Strip fell under Egyptian military administration. The Palestinian Arab population was divided. A minority remained as citizens within Israel under military rule, while the majority became stateless refugees in the West Bank, Gaza, and neighboring Arab countries. In the following decades, Palestinian national identity coalesced around the experience of the Nakba and the desire for self-determination. This sentiment was politically institutionalized with the formation of the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, in 1964, which would later be dominated by Yasser Arafat's Fatah movement. The regional situation remained volatile, punctuated by events like the 1956 Suez Crisis, but the status quo was shattered in June 1967 with the Six-Day War. In a preemptive strike against Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, Israel captured the Sinai Peninsula and the Gaza Strip from Egypt, the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan, and the Golan Heights from Syria. This swift military victory resulted in Israel's occupation of the remaining territories of former Mandatory Palestine and placed over 1 million more Palestinians under its direct military control. Shortly thereafter, the first Israeli settlements were established in the occupied territories, a policy that would expand significantly in the coming years. The United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 242, calling for Israeli withdrawal from occupied territories in exchange for peace, a formula that would become the cornerstone of future diplomacy. The 1973 Yom Kippur War further entrenched these new realities. In 1987, a spontaneous popular uprising, the First Intifada, erupted in the West Bank and Gaza, challenging the occupation through civil disobedience and protests. The Intifada created new political momentum, leading to secret negotiations and the historic 1993 Oslo Accords. This agreement established the Palestinian Authority as an interim self-governing body in parts of the West Bank and Gaza, and laid out a framework for a final peace settlement. However, the process faltered, and the 2000 Camp David summit failed to produce an agreement. The collapse was followed by the outbreak of the Second Intifada, a period of intense violence. In response, Israel began constructing a barrier in the West Bank, and, in 2005, unilaterally disengaged from the Gaza Strip. In 2007, following a brief civil conflict, the militant group Hamas seized control of Gaza, leading to a political split with the Fatah-led Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and a long-term Israeli-Egyptian blockade of the coastal enclave. The subsequent years have been defined by a stalled peace process, continued Israeli settlement expansion, and periodic conflicts, leaving the history of the land and its peoples to continue along a path of unresolved division.